Okay, so a lot has happened in the last few days in regards to sport. The Australian Open, all tennis players who have qualified or are appearing at the Australian Open have to quarantine for a 2 week period. Grimsby Town in English football have been fined for repeat COVID protocol breaches. Scottish football below the Scottish Championship has been suspended for 3 weeks. The first two races of the F1 calendar have been postponed, and we're not sure when they're going to be rearranged. There are talks ongoing about the Rugby World Cup and a possibility, although a highly unlikely possibility, that will be postponed until 2022. That will be interesting to watch how that story develops. In the NRL, Payne Haas has been arrested. So more off-season drama in the NRL. There never is a quiet off-season with the NRL. There's always a player or players misbehaving. So there you go. Situation normal there. The NHL has resumed play. Been a lot of goals scored. It's been a very interesting resumption to play, considering there's no fans in attendance. Did I catch the NFL games or something? No, I did not. I haven't caught any of the NFL really. In my mind, I'm falling out of love with certain sports and the way they've handled things. Not saying that the NFL is a bad sport or a bad league, but I've tuned out somewhat with certain sports and certain leagues. Um, I think the NFL does have a lot of issues. It has. I don't think. I mean, the fact it managed to complete the regular season and we've got to the playoffs and all that is an amazing achievement. They still want to have 100% attendance at the Super Bowl, which I find mad. The fact they had so many positive tests and they carried on regardless, and there was some controversy throughout the season because of their insistence that no games were cancelled or postponed. They didn't allow themselves much flexibility if something went wrong, basically. So that's a situation and a debate we're having over here in European sport. Should European football continue without suspension? We know that the European Rugby Champions Cup and Challenge Cup, so the rugby union version of the Champions League and Europa League, has been suspended for 3 weeks. That's due to the French government not allowing games to take place in France. The Six Nations, its start date is in doubt. So that's what it is, really. How do you think the Cowboys and the NRL will go this season, and who will be key in the prediction? I've done my prediction on the Cowboys season so far. I sort of got to get back on with those NRL predictions. I think the Cowboys will be better with Todd Payton as coach. A lot hinges on the halves combination, which I think is a weakness. There's a lot of players at the Cowboys who are massively underperforming and have done for several years. They've not made finals since 2017. I think they're still living in the shadow of Jonathan Thurston since his retirement. They haven't fully replaced his leadership, his drive around the team, his organisation, and what he brought to the team. Morgan is regularly injured. Valentine Holmes had an injury hit season last year and didn't really hit his stride. The forward pack underperformed. The defence wasn't good enough. I think they will improve. Whether they make finals or not, it's going to be very, very interesting, considering that we're still 2 months away from the start of the season, so there's a lot to think about in that regard. There's still time for again, players are moving teams all the time right now, so they can still make additions to their team. They can offload some players from their team, but I think at the moment, until we can get into the first couple of weeks of the season and work out how teams are doing, it's very hard to accurately predict. But I was going off last season's performance. Yes, it was a reduced season, but I think it's an interesting one to see how they'll do. On the Broncos, I think they'll improve, but I think that the difference between the Cowboys and the Broncos is the Cowboys have a slightly stronger base to build upon. But their issues are pretty obvious: halves combination and defence in general. The Broncos is a complete different kettle of fish. They just fell apart completely. The Seabold situation, the Wayne Bennett situation, how they handled the transition of Wayne Bennett to Anthony Seabold, they moved it forward a season early. The way they handled their list management, their players, the way the team fell apart even after Anthony Seabold left. They won 3 games last season, 1 game since resumption of play. Their defence was the worst in the league. They had some record defeats. I don't know what the Broncos. I mean, yeah, they've got Kevin Walters in charge, but he hasn't been involved in the club game for a very, very long time. So that will be interesting to see if he can bring some confidence back to that playing group. They have got some good young talent in that team. But there's playerial discipline, as Payne Haas has proved overnight, which has really harmed the team. Pangai Junior situation. They've lost David. There's a lot going on with some of these young players, and there's a lot of controversy around the board. There's a lot of negativity at that team, and if it can be a turnaround, it can be achieved. But I think this team, their confidence has been damaged, their development, their player management and list management, and off-field dramas. I think more is going to come out about why the last couple of seasons has been an utter disaster. Really, there's a lot to think about in regards to what's going on with the Broncos, who I think are the top 5 players right now in the NRL. Wow, that's a tough one. I think you have to look at the teams that made the top 4, top 5 in the league. I think that's where your top 5 players are. I think you could argue quite a few players to make the top 5. It's a difficult one because obviously Cameron Smith is officially not retired. He's still an active player. No decision. There's no news is broken on his decision to stay another year or retire or move on from the Storm. But I think Pappenhausen would be in there. Tedesco would be in there. Johnson on the wing at Souths. Cleary at the Panthers. It's a difficult one. Tamalolo, he's not consistent enough. He is not consistent enough. I don't think. I don't think Tamalolo is on his day. He's brilliant, but he's not consistent enough, and he plays in a team that's not consistent enough. So you can't really get an accurate judge on his performances. If he's consistent on a bad team, and he's consistently like one of the best forwards, the thing is the Cowboys are just average. They're not consistent enough. They had a very down year last year. Immediately a shortened season, and towards the end of the season they started picking up the other result here or there and started to get away from the bottom. Had it been a full-length season, they would have been just outside finals. But the fact you're putting a lot of pressure on Tamalolo to perform every game, and if he's missing games or he's unfit, he's not playing well, it falls apart. They need to have more forwards to step up. The South African teams joining the Pro 14 will make it a better league. Well, with the current virus restrictions and travel from South Africa being suspended at this time, it will be interesting to see what happens. There is already talk about the Lions tour actually being played in the UK and Ireland rather than going to South Africa. So in that regard, on paper, yes, it makes the Pro League a little bit more interesting. But you have to then take into consideration the away game travel. You would have to take, because we've already seen this with when you have the Cheetahs and the Lions, and the Kings. Sorry, and I think you look at it, and when teams are playing, it's the South African. It's the travel. It's not the time difference because there's not much time difference. South Africa's, I think, 1 to 2 hours ahead. So with the Italians and the Italian teams, they are on the same time zone, but it's the distance and travel. And this season, with what's going on with the pandemic and this new South African variant and the travel bans in place, it will be interesting to see how the Pro League organises its season. It will be interesting to see again what happens with the Lions tour. That'll be very, very interesting. So it's a difficult one. I think on paper it makes a fair bit of sense. The breakdown in Super Rugby between Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, and Japan. I mean, Super Rugby got bloated and couldn't sustain itself. And you look at the finances of it, and it's a shambles, absolute shambles. And this is before the pandemic even started to really hit. Of course, the Welsh fans don't like it. The Welsh fans are a toxic fan base. A minority of fans, but it's in my view, I don't particularly go on with Welsh rugby fans. I've had an ongoing battle with them, with just their real shitness. To be brutally honest, at the end of the day, they want an English Welsh league. It's not going to work. The finances in Welsh rugby would just to take on that burden into the English system, which has got its own problems, would be ruinous. They can't figure out a funding formula. To represent Wales, you have to play in a Welsh region. You can't play overseas. The home selection rule, which I think is a very, very archaic rule in a global game. But there's the traditionalists and the pragmatists and the modernisers and all that. But Welsh rugby has massive financial problems and organisational and structural problems. They want to have this. They want to, leave the pro league and join the English system. Then their provincial clubs would have to be disbanded in theory, and you'd have to go back to what you have in the Welsh Premiership, and they would have to join the English system, and then travel becomes a problem. And right now, travel between Wales and England is banned unless you're a key worker, so I can't see that working. I would, because they're not financially viable. You would have to disband the 4 Welsh regions that you have now, in theory, and you would have to look at the Welsh league structure and try and merge the semi-pro clubs basically in Wales with the Championship and the lower leagues. It doesn't work. You would have to completely restructure rugby for both England and Wales, and you would have to have some kind of agreement with the Welsh Rugby Union and the English Rugby Union, 2 unions that don't really like each other very much. And I can't see that kind of cooperation working with the old boys in suits. I just can't. Too much politics there. Thoughts on Steve Bruce? He's been pragmatic. I can understand fans' frustration with Bruce and his style of football, but you have to look at the owner. That's where the buck stops. I'm sorry. You can't blame it all on the manager. He's been given very limited transfer funds. Yet another takeover deal has collapsed. The Amanda Staveley one, part 2. And if you look at it, it doesn't matter who's in charge at Newcastle. It stops with the owner. It stops with Mike Ashley. It stops with the biggest cunt this country has ever produced. That's what I said 4 years ago. I stick by that. Mike Ashley is an odious man. I'm not a fan of him. And what Mike Ashley sums up is a problem with football ownership of clubs, and how the fit and proper persons test is, well, it's a joke. I think. Do I have some sympathy with Steve Bruce? Well, he's been given tools to do the job that are inadequate by the owner. Yes, his style of football is another thing entirely. I mean, if he had the money to do it and he was still playing that way, then yes, you can argue that he's a crap manager. He's a pragmatic manager. He's been given a remit by the owner not to get relegated. That's his remit. There's no adventure there. There's no, I'll just go for it. Because they could have beaten Arsenal in that FA Cup 3rd round game. And if they had done, that could have been a catalyst for their season. Yeah, the problem is the youth program and the training facilities are run down. The club's embroiled with a tax investigation that's been ongoing for years. The club can't get sold. The Premier League keeps blocking every takeover deal or it collapses. So then you can ask questions of the Premier League and how they've allowed certain owners to buy clubs and not others. They allowed the Venkeys to buy Blackburn. Let's just put that into perspective. The team that I follow is run by chicken farmers who have no clue how to run a football club. I'm just putting it out there. We fell down as far as League One. The Newcastle United situation, I'm open-minded and pragmatic myself in my view. Do I rate Steve Bruce as a manager? Okay, his tactics are a bit, stale, one-dimensional. And the problem is, it's the owner. It doesn't matter that Steve Bruce was the 7th or 6th choice to take the job. If Big Sam turned down Newcastle for a second time and said, "No, I don't want to do this," it tells you something when they're going to their 6th or 7th choice manager. If anyone asks to be a mod, it doesn't happen. I have to see this person regularly turn up in live stream and have a reasonable debate. I mean, I have only seen you a couple of times. The people who are mods are regularly viewing and commenting on videos and regularly in live streams. You can't just ask. I have to get a certain appreciation of a subscriber or a viewer to make them a mod. People ask, they tend to get bumped down the list quite significantly. So it's a thing I've learned from other streamers, that they cherry pick, in a sense, their moderators based on the experiences they have with those viewers and question, and how they behave in the chat and over a long period of time. It doesn't just happen. On the side of the Welsh club system and the English club system, and how Welsh fans are demanding that their teams join the English system, they don't even turn up and watch their own clubs play. These people saying, "Oh, we've got no money in the game's a mess." Watch your teams play. They weren't doing that before COVID. I, they turn up for the internationals and then they bring on that chip on their shoulder and that Welsh nationalism and that toxic fan base. They don't give a toss about the club game. That's why the club game is broke. On the side of what else we got? What else we got? Yeah, Grimsby Town. Before I forget, before I get back to Australian things, because there is a few Australian sports stories happening right now. Grimsby Town were fined for 3 COVID breaches, which resulted in 3 games being cancelled, postponed earlier this season. They've been fined by the FA. I think that sets a precedent. Now they're actually going after clubs. With what we've seen in the last, I'm going to say 3 weeks with the Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two, the non-league being hammered with game postponements due to the coronavirus. I'm surprised more clubs haven't been fined. I'm surprised more teams and players haven't been fined and team officials and players suspended. Because getting back to the Carlos the Flea and the NRL, when players and coaches in the NRL last season breached the COVID protocols that were put in place between the league and the state governments, players and coaches were given 2 weeks suspensions and fined. And the fines went up for each different individual. They said, right, we've set a precedent, bang. The fact that what we have seen with individual players regularly just flouting the rules and the official guidance coming out is ridiculous by the Premier League and the Football League. They're saying they're tested twice a week. That's it. They're now trying to ban celebrations. Here's the thing: the games. I mean, when you look at when Crawley Town, for example, beat Leeds, or when Chorley beat Derby County in their celebrations, these guys were tested before they even played a game. The situation was saying players can't celebrate, minimise contact. Well, how the hell is a player man mark another player in the box? The guidance given out by the government and the FA and the Premier League is ridiculous. They should just test more and punish rule breaches more severely, and they're not. So that's my opinion. On the message you've just retracted. County cricket and rugby union. I think rugby union and rugby league to a certain extent is more community based. You'll get fans from the local community watching their teams play. I wouldn't say it's mostly old men, but I think county cricket does have a problem because it has a lack of exposure, and the TV deals keep coming up. We keep having the same discussion about the TV deals that are in place. Welsh rugby, well, this is the interesting thing. Welsh rugby fans are a really confusing bunch. They really are. They like giving the abuse online when you disagree with them, but they don't support their domestic clubs. Doesn't matter if it's in the Welsh Premiership. Doesn't matter if it's where's from the old manor. God, we are going back some there. Oh, Jesus, that is taking me back a little bit. I haven't been to the old manor for quite some time. My old local, which I used to work at many years ago. God, that's taking me back some. How you doing, Wes? But no, the Welsh Premiership and all that. There's no coverage. There's no media coverage. There's no attempt to grow the game. There's a reason why the Pro League exists. It's because the Welsh Rugby Union basically getting broke in the early 2000s. They just said we run out of money. I remember it when it was Neath, I think, were the team that had the first financial crisis that was highlighted. And it was spoken about. Well, I remember this is how old I am. It's how far back I go because I am in my early 30s now. It was Grandstand. Grandstand, yeah, I'm that old. I remember Des Lynam with his mustache in the mornings on a Saturday and Sunday. Basically, in the late 90s, late 2000s, after professionalism came along, the Welsh game basically had no money. It ran out of cash, and the Welsh clubs were basically bankrupt. So they came up with the Welsh regions, and they're basically bankrupt. So we just lurched from one season to another with Welsh rugby with no money. It's an amazing thing that the national side in the Six Nations and in World Cups has got to knockout stages, has been winning Six Nations, has been ranked in the top 5 in the world, developed all these world-class players with no money. Can you imagine what Welsh rugby would be like if it had money? Can you just imagine that? It's amazing. It's amazing to think how much of a powerhouse Wales could be if it had money and good governance, which it lacks and has lacked for decades. This is where poor sports governance and poor financial management in a sport hinders it. Rugby league is another example. The NRL is far better governed than the Super League. changed my mind. And the NRL has got governance issues. Look at the Todd Greenberg era. Jesus, that was a shit show for day one. Yeah, the Neath situation. If we're going back all that time, like 2 decades ago, before the Ospreys were a thing. Yeah, they have a big ground, couldn't fill it. Swansea, it's more of a football city than a rugby city. They've had, don't get me wrong, the Ospreys have developed some really good players since they were formed as a team. But Swansea's a football city and it's rivalries with Cardiff. And what do the Welsh Pro League teams do? They drop the place monikers. So Newport Gwent Dragons is now the Dragons. Neath Swansea Ospreys is just the Ospreys. The Cardiff Blues are the Blues, and Llanelli Scarlets are now the Scarlets. FAPL. Yeah, I think the guidance from the Premier League and the FA and the Football League, they're testing these players twice a week. I'm an NHL fan. I think you remember that, Wes. I'm a massive NHL fan. They're testing daily. The NRL testing daily when they were playing, or at least more regular. And they had much stricter enforced protocols with state and regional governments because of the governance structure in Canada and USA and Australia and all that on resumption of play. They had regular tests daily. What I noticed when I'm following the resumption of play with the NRL the whole of last season, didn't miss a game from round 3 to the grand final, was that there was no positive tests, and those players that breached the COVID protocols or left the bubble had to stand down for 2 weeks. If they breached the bubble deliberately, I think Aidan Tolman, I think his kid showed signs of it. He had to self-isolate. Canterbury Bulldogs player. He had to take a couple of weeks out, come back with negative tests on a daily basis before he was allowed to resume training and resume play. Michael Vaughan, 2 week suspension, $20,000 fine. Wayne Bennett got a fine. Anthony Seibold wasn't allowed to return to the bubble. Then he quit his job anyway. But the punishments were there. They increased the fines for players misbehaving. They very quickly stopped. The NHL had a couple of positive tests with the resumption of play in the summer for the Stanley Cup. And there was a couple of positive tests in the off-season, and then the Dallas Stars had an outbreak. But for the most part, it was contained, it was controlled, and the situation, they've resumed play. No fans in attendance, even though there's the option for some locations to have fans. You know what? It's not appropriate. They're taking a financial hit, but they're getting on with it. In the football side of things, these players are tested before they have to play. Before they enter the ground, they have to have a negative test. I think the social media reaction, some of these people are just. Twitter is a cesspool of humanity, in my opinion. It's a cesspool of people, keyboard warriors that wouldn't have the guts to say what they're saying in the street because they know they're going to get their head kicked in, but they can do it on social media. It's a cesspool of people who have no positivity in their life. On the side of the new protocols, I hope the players just give it 2 fingers, and then we'll see what happens. I think they should be more targeting the deliberate rule breaches by players. I'm going to use Kyle Walker. I use Kyle Walker every live stream because the guy's a knob, and he puts his he kind of puts his COVID breaches on social media so people like me can have a laugh at him, because he's had multiple breaches. Andre Gray at Watford has had multiple. He's had more breaches than goals. There are some players who have regularly breached the rules. They should be punished. But they should be. I think they should be punished. Yeah, it's because it's the PR exercise. It's the Premier League, the FA, the EFL on the PR exercise because of all the negative headlines since March, with the PFA, telling players not to take wage cuts, but non-playing staff being furloughed and laid off. You've got clubs claiming they can't afford to pay their players, therefore wages, still spending over £1 billion in the transfer market. Tottenham, with their Gareth Bale salary agreement with Real Madrid. The whole thing, okay, is a shower of shit. There is no other way to describe it. I try and keep my channel PG, but with football, this is why I'm falling out of love with the sport. It's a shower of shit. The fact that the Premier League is trying to hold the lower leagues to ransom with its rescue package was a shower of shit. Manchester United and Liverpool trying to like bully the rest of the Premier League into their way of thinking was a shower of shit. The European Super League, shower of shit. UEFA came up with their new Euro format, the third tier, which is just bring back the Cup Winners' Cup. That's all you had to do. One thing, yeah. Just in my opinion, football's PR is a PR exercise. They're on the defensive. They've had a lot of negative headlines, but they're not taking action against what's causing those negative headlines. So they're targeting the few joys that we have left in the sport in this current 12-month period, right? Games taking place. AFC Marines game against Tottenham could be the last game they play for an indefinite period of time. Okay, they lost 5-0. That's irrelevant. Their league has been suspended since before Christmas. That could be the last game they play until God knows when. Chorley, I think Chorley are in the National League North. Their league is still going in the non-league. But again, there are now discussions with the FA and the non-league structure about null and voiding the season, not just suspending, just calling it. Some of these clubs will not survive. But the Premier League players continue regularly to flout the rules, and there is no punishment. There is no suspension from the FA. There is no fine from the FA. There's no fine or suspension from the Premier League. There is no disciplinary action taken by the governing body, and the clubs are saying we're dealing with it internally. The player is not clearly fined or suspended. I don't get this. Does he dock a few weeks' wages? Does he lose a bonus? Don't get me wrong. I love sport. I do. And I'll get to the Australian Open as one of the tournaments that could be cancelled. The tennis. I will get to that in a minute. But the biggest sport in this country, in the UK, is a shit show. You could say the same about Major League Baseball in the US being a bit of a shit show before its resumption of play. But, you know, there are several high-profile sports and sports stars that are causing a lot of negative headlines, and there's some positive stories that are coming out as well, like Chorley's win over Derby, Crawley Town over Leeds in the FA Cup brought some much needed relief from the monotony that is the situation. But the situation is weak governance by the FA, weak disciplinary action taken, and these clubs should be fined. They fined Grimsby, a team that can't afford to be fined, but they're not fining Man City for multiple player breaches. Multiple. Let's be clear here. Money talks. On the tournaments that could be cancelled, we know the F1 they've postponed the first few races of the season. The Australian Open players are having to quarantine for 2 weeks. So if any players test positive in that quarantine period, it could put the tournament at risk. Although Australia has a far lower infection rate than let's say, South Africa, the UK. It's one of those things. Rugby League World Cup, question mark. They can't afford to postpone it. That's what they don't want to do. They're planning to have fans in stadiums in full attendance. The less attendance they get, the more money they get from the government. There is a government funding package that's already been agreed before the pandemic to grow the game. There was already an agreement there. They also got the emergency loan from the government to subsidise the lack of fans. So I do believe the Rugby League World Cup will take place in October. If they have to change venues and change the format, that will affect my review. I'm going to do a preview on the Rugby World Cup as it currently stands with the groups that are currently in place and the teams that have currently qualified. But we could see teams pull out the tournament. We could see travel restrictions. They might have to go into bubbles. We might see less venues. The whole shebang. So the Rugby League World Cup, there is a question mark about with fans in attendance, reduce fans in attendance, or delaying it by a year. So that's something to bear in mind. The Euros, well, looking at travel restrictions, that is going to be a hard one to pull off. The Euros could be postponed. The Olympics may not take place. But we'll see what we'll see. We'll see what happens. On the side of players not celebrating last night, Harry Kane is the hopeless captain of England because apart from set pieces, he has no pay. My opinion's divided on Harry Kane and Gareth Southgate as manager. Each person's their own view on is Gareth Southgate the right guy, wrong guy, team selection. But I think players will just continue as is until players get suspended. Until the FA and the Premier League finally go, you know what, we might need to take disciplinary action against clubs and players. Oh wait, we've used Grimsby Town as the fall guys. We'll throw them under the bus. A team that can't afford a fine. 42 million in tears. That's Evander Kane. It's doable. It's very, very doable. Mike Tyson's done it. The Evander Kane situation. He's had a good start to the season, though. I don't know how much of this is overblown and how much of it is true. We know there are court documents about some of his unpaid gambling debts and some of the money he owes hotels, restaurants. The Evander Kane situation, until there is a full public disclosure, because there's ongoing legal stuff, it's difficult to comment. But what is reported, if that is the full amount, which that's a ballpark figure they put out there. He has earned more than what he's declaring bankrupt. So he's earned more than his debt. So there's things he has actually paid for. He may lose his 3 properties, but he was, he's playing quite well to start the season. It's an interesting one. He's not the only sports star who's earned big money, quite young, to have financial problems or financial scandal. But we will see if he goes bankrupt, then his creditors will still get some of their money back. So it'd be interesting to see what the NHLPA and the NHL, down the line do about it. But he's still playing, and he's playing quite well at the moment. But that's an interesting one. But there has been ongoing speculation about him having a gambling issue for several years. You look at his time at Atlanta and then at Winnipeg, and his departure from there. The team played better after he left. So you could say, was he a disruption in the locker room? He goes to Buffalo, doesn't work out there, goes to San Jose. There's a very famous photograph of Dustin Bufflin walking past him and Evander Kane having a little chuckle with him, and Dustin Bufflin flicking him the bird. Dustin Bufflin's known to be a joker, but that looked like he did not like this guy. I think the situation you find with a player like Evander Kane, this could be a very big fall from grace, but he's not the only player to have addiction problems in any sport. But the situation, I think the way the media reported it, the way the discussion is going about, is he owes a lot of money to several companies and creditors, a lot of money. We're talking millions ago. I think he's had to have out-court lawsuits. Basically, things have obviously come to a head very, very quickly, and I think the coronavirus has exposed his weak financial position. Well, my NFL, I do my NFL fandom. Well, I've tuned out of the NFL a fair bit. I have. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not as passionate about the NFL in the last couple of years as I used to be. And this is a league that has so much scandal attached around it with individual players, team owners, and a lot of negative headlines comes out of the NFL, and there seems to be no culture shift within dressing rooms and within organisations. But it is just, the NFL is an interesting topic, and I can do some more videos on the NFL. The Euros won't be put back again. We'll see what happens if they have to change the fixturing and where games are played. It all depends now on travel restrictions, I would have thought. UEFA have already stated before COVID this will be the only time it's a pan-continental tournament. They're not going to do the idea again. And here's one of the reasons why it shouldn't be a pan-continental tournament, because you may have a political problem in a country. Azerbaijan and Armenia. There's games in Baku. There's Azerbaijan and Armenia. Let's say Armenia qualified for the tournament and one of their group games was in Baku. That could be a bit politically difficult, and there may be restrictions on it. It raises a lot of headaches. I think on the surprise with Evander Kane blowing that much in tears, I think he's actually had a problem for a lot longer than that. A lot longer than just the last 2 years. I think the last 2 years reports have surfaced of issues of his finances, but I think that the issue goes much further back with Evander Kane. On the side of the Glazers and the Manchester United ownership, yes, the Glazers have won a lot of trophies while owning Manchester United. There was a fair bit of success before they came. The Kroenkes and the Liverpool ownership, Arsenal's ownership. I think, is it Dundee or Dundee United have an American owner as well? There's a lot of American money in English and Scottish football, and even I think Swansea is owned by some Americans as well. In British football, there's a lot of American money. But yes, the Man United situation. Well, I'm not a big fan of the club. When you're buying something with money that isn't yours, and then you drain the way Man United run, I can understand a lot of the hardcore fans' frustration. There's a lot of frustration with how the club is owned and run. So there is that. On the side of Edward, but as a businessman, he makes the Glazers money. That's his job. And as a footballing brain, he doesn't have one. My next door neighbour is a Man United fan. I have debates about him. He's kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek. They're top of the league right now, but this is a disrupted season. But we'll see what happens long term, because the fans aren't happy. Fans are not happy with the amount of debt the club has, and at some point, regardless if Solskjaer becomes a very successful manager with the club, whoever manages the club, I don't think Ferguson was necessarily happy with how the Glazers ran things. Transfer policy. Been some very interesting signings at Man United that are just PR signings, it seems, just to sell merchandise. Not because the players are any good anymore, because they're high-profile players who sell merchandise, who may not be at their best. But yeah, overseas ownership of clubs is a bugbear of a lot of fans. On the Evander Kane situation again, right, last Evander Kane commentary, no one said San Jose might defeat Vegas 2019, but in the end, Vegas defeated Evander Kane. I think Evander Kane's issues are a bit more than just gambling a lot of money at 2 casinos in Vegas where he owes them money. He would not pay his bills at restaurants and rack up restaurant and bar tabs. This guy has not been responsible with his money. But we're going by media speculation and certain media reports until if he has filed for bankruptcy, it's all filed, and that bankruptcy goes to I don't know how the American legal system or Canadian legal system would work in a bankruptcy state, but it'll be interesting to see what comes out of any in or out of court settlement with his creditors, and how much of the reported debt is actually true, how much is secured and unsecured debt. And it will be then very, very interesting to see how much his creditors recoup and what happens going forward. I think the debate about overseas ownership in the Premier League has been ongoing for a long time, since Abramovich and the Glazers took over clubs in the early 2000s. Solskjaer is getting the best out of an average team. That's my opinion on what Solskjaer is doing at Man United. He's got players there who are overpaid, not performing, and need to be shown the door. But because they sell merchandise, and because they're high profile, not necessarily because they're the most talented. Your Pogba's examples. I'm not sure how much say Solskjaer has over transfer policy. Much like his predecessors in Mourinho, Van Gaal, Moyes, I'm not so sure how much say they had over transfer policy, because some of the signings, even under Ferguson, were disastrous. It shows how good Ferguson was as a manager. They did. They wanted Grealish and Sancho, and they didn't. They got Cavani. Cavani's not a bad player. He is an older player, not a bad player. A good experienced head to have around some of the young players to help them develop. But yeah, United's transfer policy is a head scratcher. I find it interesting. The players they were targeting and the money they were throwing out there, and the money they were saying they were willing to pay, and their returns in the transfer market, that they seem to be making a few little moves here and there in this January window. But I don't know what their transfer policy is, and I don't know what their player retention and recruitment policy is. It will be interesting. Well, he wouldn't be manager if the Glazers didn't want him there. The Glazers aren't stupid. Let's be honest. They're not stupid. They're making money out of this club. But questions have to be asked why their purchase all those years ago was approved, considering they were using other people's money. And you look at Chelsea and some of their transfer policy and some of their recruitment and player retention and their abuse of the loan system. Again, you have to ask the question of the Premier League itself and its integrity. How some of these owners got hold of some of these clubs. And it doesn't matter if they're a domestic owner, like Ashley, or an overseas owner like the Glazers, or Kroenke, or Abramovich. It does raise the question of the integrity. It raises the question of integrity of money or integrity. And the Premier League's gone for money. It doesn't care where the money comes from as long as the money keeps coming. Look at the pay-per-view format. The pay-per-view format before Christmas, they just misread the room. Completely misread the room. Fans very quickly turned against it. And they were chasing the money. They completely misread the room of their customer base. When a company misreads its customer base, it's going to suffer. It will go out of business. It will suffer losses. I think in the situation when we're looking at the state of football, there are growing calls to suspend play for a couple of weeks, and elite sport is in a very privileged position. Some elite sport, not all elite sport, has actually resumed competitive play. Make that clear. The position football finds itself in is in a very privileged position. They're abusing that privilege, and they have done since resumption. All I can just basically say is there's been a lot of poor governance decisions. Oh look, I don't think they can afford to suspend, even though the lower league clubs have said without fans in attendance, it will actually cost us more money to play games than not to play games. Plain and simple. When the season resumed, there was a hope back in September that fans would be in attendance by now, in some sort of capacity, but back in attendance. And the lower league club said the only way we will resume play when their season didn't resume in League One and League Two at the end of last season was we need fans in attendance. They were given assurances that fans would be in attendance. Didn't happen. And then we found out in November that clubs weren't going to be able to make their payroll at the end of the month. The FA chairman's gone. You see where I'm going with this? There is issues within the FA. There's issues within the EFL and the Premier League. There's weak governance across the board. There are people in positions of governance who shouldn't be there, and those that are there aren't doing the job very, very well. There's a real confused. There's no unified direction with the professional game in this country. The Football League and the Premier League don't like each other. The FA, the Premier League, and the Football League don't like it. There's a lot of mistrust, and there's a lot of political manoeuvring. What is really striking is football. The government has said this is not going to get any financial aid. And then I'm going to go back to rugby league. Rugby league reports have surfaced that there are 3 options on the table for the World Cup at the end of the year. Play with full attendance or as many tickets sold as possible. Right. See you later, Wes. So the Rugby League World Cup plays with as max attendance, so as many tickets sold as possible. Reduced attendance with social distancing, if that's still a thing that's in place, or no fans at all. Or they postpone. Either way, the government has to pump in some money. They don't want to postpone to 2022. They really want to avoid doing that. And UEFA and FIFA. I don't think FIFA can afford UEFA to be an enemy. They're the wealthiest conglomerate of FAs. Most of their money comes from Europe. Like, they can't afford a war with UEFA. And FIFA is not a very popular organisation with UEFA, and a lot of UEFA members with all the corruption. It's I can't see FIFA really risking open fracture between UEFA and FIFA. And what we've seen from fans' responses, if FIFA want to have their Champions League, it's not going to be well supported. The Buffalo Bills, the Bills Mafia, looking at the results, and this is their best playoff performance in a long time. They I think Buffalo is a sports market that is interesting. Buffalo is a city that has in its periods some very good teams that haven't quite got the silverware. The Sabres, the Bills with 3 straight Super Bowl appearances. It's a city that has a fanatical fan base. It doesn't matter what sport you're playing. But they don't quite succeed. But the fans still keep turning up. Buffalo is a strange North American sports market. Their fans are lunatics. They are mad for celebrating failure for years. The reason why the Bills and the Sabres haven't relocated or rebranded is the fans keep turning up. The fans keep turning up and supporting the team when the teams aren't very good. Look at the Buffalo Sabres for a decade. The Buffalo Bills for 2 decades. These teams have been junk for years. And the fans keep showing up. So, until fans give up and stop tolerating what I class as overpaid failure, then fans will continue, and the owners will keep making money off mediocrity. It seems now the Bills seem to have turned things around, and I think the Buffalo Bills could be a dark horse for the Super Bowl, just looking at their results and their playoff form. Rugby League World Cup to New Zealand, that's too short notice, and the travel restrictions in place with COVID. I don't think Jacinda Ardern wants to bring COVID en masse to New Zealand, considering that they are the world-leading country in reducing COVID infections. While it'll be a great PR cue for New Zealand to do, A, they have the facilities ready, and B, I don't think the Kiwi government wants to undo all the hard work that they put in place with their protocols. The fact that the country's basically COVID-free with a couple of occasional cases here or there, and with all the variants that have sprung up. New Zealand is ahead of the curve when it comes to. I wouldn't say it's a tiny population. Most of New Zealand's population lives in the big towns and cities. It's very urbanised. Very urbanised. So a risk of a virus outbreak is actually increased in New Zealand. Not because of the size of population, it's where the population is concentrated. The big towns and cities is where Auckland, Wellington, Dunedin, Invercargill, Christchurch, 80-90% of the population lives in big urban areas. The risk to New Zealand is very, very high. They have mitigated it very, very well. But does New Zealand have the economic and financial resources in place to then host a World Cup? Do they have the infrastructure in place? Yeah, it's an island nation, but they're heavily reliant on Australia for their trade. And they've had enough issues with Australia. But they wouldn't allow the New Zealand Warriors, to play their games at Mount Smart Stadium. The Warriors are starting the season in Australia. They're not allowed to play in Auckland for at least the first 5 to 7 weeks of the season. They might play the whole season in Australia. The New Zealand government are being very strict. They're not going to have the World Cup in New Zealand, considering that they shared rights with Australia and Papua New Guinea at the last World Cup. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Don't get me wrong. I think it would work. But I can't see the New Zealand government, with all the positivity they've had, signing up to something like that. Not going to happen. I think the Warriors will probably end up in Australia all season as well. And that will be interesting. I do think the Warriors will end up playing the whole NRL season in Tamworth. I can't see them mid-season being allowed to go back to New Zealand. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens this season. We know they're due to start the season in Australia. They've entered their training camp. They've entered their bubble. Whether their families will be allowed to join them this year will be interesting. That was a real sticking point last year that caused players to leave camp and go home. But on the Rugby League World Cup side of things, the organisers are very, very hopeful that the backup plan of going for 2022 is a last resort. They don't want to do it. It will cost them too much, and the government has to fork out more money. The government probably wants it to take place on time as well, because it costs the government less money if the World Cup takes place, because there's a legacy part of the bid where they improve local facilities, they improve infrastructure, and the UK government doesn't want to lose that or jewel in their crown. But yeah, on the European side, yeah, it's a mess. On the Rugby World Cup, though, I will be doing a preview video. But as I say, the groups may change, the structure of the tournament may change because of COVID. It will be interesting to see what happens with the tournament, and venue changes as well. A lot can change with the Rugby League World Cup. So watch this space is all I'm going to say on that. There's a lot of unknowns with the tournament. I'll be looking at the tournament as it currently stands, with how the groups are structured and the knockout stages are structured, and how the tournament should progress from Group A. But I think it's. I think also we do have 9 months, 9 months until the World Cup, so there is a period of time between now and where the tournament starts. But there's so much that's happening from a daily basis. This isn't like this isn't like a natural disaster where there's an earthquake or there's a forest fire or a volcanic eruption. This is a very fluid situation where on a day-to-day basis things change. I mean, I live in before Christmas I was in a tier 2 area. Within 2 days I was in tier 4. My Christmas got cancelled. Within 48 hours I went from able to hang out with my mates to I can't do anything apart from go to work and go to the shops. I went from being able to have a pretty sort of semi-normal existence to I'm in this situation. And now we're in a full lockdown. This is in the space of a month. There's talk of tougher restrictions coming in. So yeah, anything is possible right now. On the Premier League side of things, and the way they've dealt with their new protocols, and then they've released statements saying this is what we expect our players and clubs to adhere to, they're ridiculous. The people on social media pressure has caused the FA to come out with these protocols. I don't know. No, I don't think chopping teams, because they want to grow the game, they want to grow the sport. Reducing the number of teams would be a negative for the sport. It would damage the sport's image. These teams are qualified by right. They want to grow the game. They want to increase the imprint of the game globally. To have Greece and Jamaica there is a positive. Yeah, they might not win any games, but they're growing the game. They're growing the TV audience. They're growing the fan base. Hence why the group structure is structured how it is, and I will do a preview on that. I'll have to get my big notepad out, do a fair bit of looking at the structure of the tournament, because it is structured in a certain way, so the smaller teams get to play each other in their own group, and the winner of that group will then go on to the knockout stages with the other 2 groups, which are of the stronger teams, to make it a more competitive tournament. So there's none of these blowout scores that we've seen in previous years. Yes, the bubble situation will be, I think, in place. I think they have got plans in place. They've reduced the number of venues from original to now. They've dropped some venues from the list, which I had a video of a couple of years ago on the channel when the venues were announced initially, when Prince Harry did the draw of the tournament and the venues were announced. It's a difficult one. We've seen in the last World Cup player misbehaviour, especially in the Scotland team, where 3 high-profile players in the Scotland squad were too drunk to get on a flight, and their tournament disintegrated into chaos. I would think we're 3 years after the last tournament. A lot's changed. I would think I think the RFL, the hosts, England, the local authorities that have stadiums, So the local communities that are hosting teams, I think there'll be very, very strict protocols in place. Even if we've had a full vaccination policy in this country by that point, which is the plan, I would think that there will be some very strict biosecurity protocols and security protocols in place. I would think that any rule breaches would be severely punished, and I would think that if games are cancelled or postponed, we'll see what happens. It will be very interesting to see what happens with the Rugby League World Cup. It'll be very, very interesting. But I'm just going to do my standard preview, and it could be a very dated video within a very short space of time, but we'll see what happens. I think the players would have to stick very strictly to these protocols in order to play. And I can see players getting suspended, and I can see fines being issued, but we'll see what happens. I think the Warriors set a great example of the sacrifices made last season, and the Melbourne Storm had to play away from their home grounds for the majority of the season. And the Warriors had to stay in Australia for the whole of last season. It proves it can be done. And a lot of those players will be playing for nations at this World Cup. So I do think that the situation come October will be different, but a lot can happen between now and next week. Between now and tomorrow, a lot could happen. There's a lot of unknowns with what's going on. A lot of unknowns. That was Brisbane who regularly screwed up and had a lot of players under investigation and players suspended. There was a lot of screw ups. But I think if players screw up whilst on international duty, they're gonna feel a fair bit of wrath from the. I think there's going to be some very strict protocols put in place. But we'll have to see what happens. As I say, a lot can happen before the pre-tournament games and the tournament itself. We've got to see what structure the Super League season has. We've got to see what structure the NRL has, because the NRL may, is planning for a full season. The Warriors are already in camp. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Warriors this season. It'll be interesting to see what happens with State of Origin and, how the season progresses. The Super League is already planning a contingency plan to delay their start of the season by a week. So we'll see what happens. But as I say, a lot can happen between now and October. Look, day to day, it's a shambles. So my work's had to bring in new regulations. One of my sister depots has had 2 fatalities. We've got new regs in place. We've had to take our breaks separately from the depot. We can't get out the truck when we're back at depot tipping off. So on a workplace thing, my employer has had to bring in new guidance. The whole thing is interesting on a working standpoint. If we get into a sporting standpoint, I'm going to mention again the Australian Open, 2-week quarantine for players playing at the Australian Open, mandatory. And we'll have to see what happens at the Australian Open. That's going to be interesting. The NRL has led the way in resuming professional sport last year. Led the way. On the side of the NHL, they've had to change their divisional alignments to allow play to continue because the Canadian-US border is still shut. So there's a whole Canadian division, which I think is a benefit for the sport for a year. They've got a TV deal to negotiate at the end of the season. They've got an expansion team coming in. The NHL was under pressure to play a season. They could not afford to not play a season, even though the owners are actually losing money by playing. It's mad. Take the short-term financial hit for long-term stability. And I'll look at some of the minor leagues. Major League Rugby, for example, as soon as lockdowns were brought in, they just said, sod the rest of our season. We're not in a financial position to play on with no fans. We can't afford all the testing. We'll come back again in March. So there's that in place. The French government basically saying the European Rugby Union games can't take place, has led to a suspension of that competition. The whole thing is up in the air at the moment with Northern Hemisphere sport. What we're seeing with the cricket, the India Test series against Australia, players have had to self-isolate. There's been positive tests. There's concerns about they've managed to get it done, but there were times where they're like, can this test series be completed? Can games go ahead? So it's still a very fluid situation. I think again, cricket's one of those sports where, again, they're saying they want to play the 100 this year, a tournament that no one wants, apart from the ECB and the yes men, those players on centralised contracts. But it's a sport that needs a better TV deal. It needs a better TV deal. Same with rugby league in this country. The NRL has a far better TV arrangement, free to air and live streaming, and it has a pretty solid TV deal. Super League doesn't. There's a difference. Super League is a mess. The England cricket's team, the bubble situation, they whinged about the bubble and basically putting this series in doubt. They didn't want to do it, but other sports proved you can as a short-term measure. But I'll say this again: it's not a good look when the average citizen, the average person, is having to give up so much right now, and these sportsmen who are well paid don't want to make some sacrifices. For me, it's not a good look. And bear in mind, sport is a PR industry, you know. And yeah, when we look at the Premier League and the constant breaches, yeah, patience is wearing thin now. I've seen some online surveys done on various websites that are sports websites. They've done a lot of surveys have been done, and football fans are starting to run out of patience with the Premier League, with the Championship. Patience is starting to wear thin. It's probably on the India side of things. Yes, players have taken a fair bit of abuse from the fans. Doesn't show Australia in a good light. Doesn't. Some negative headlines there. India are a very good side. They got some very good players, but some of the antics of the fans and some other players, it's not good. It's not a good look. And Australia in cricket, with the aftermath of the ball tampering, putting it out there, it's still got to go a long way to rebuild the trust. I think that and rebuild the image. Cricket Australia has had a lot of negative headlines with how its players behave and react and do things, and the fans, I don't think, have helped the PR image of cricket in Australia. They haven't. But I haven't really been following the cricket. I've seen the odd headline here or there, and there's a fair few negative headlines coming out about that India tour, mostly on the Australian side of things, and it leaves a bitter taste in the mouth of neutrals such as myself. I just love the sport, and it does leave a fair bit of bitterness, I think, with how it's all gone about, considering the sacrifices that India have made in order to go over there and play. England and Sri Lanka, again, yeah, there's sacrifices to be made, but these are elite sportsmen. They're paid pretty good money. We need some relief from the humdrum situation that we find ourselves in. But the optics aren't good. They're not very good. But India and Australia have a very heated rivalry when it comes to cricket. It's been very, very heated for a very, very long time. Not just this series, but dating back decades. There's a fair bit of dislike between the two teams. And may that continue. I like a bit of rivalry. I like a bit of spice. But unfortunately, there's a line, and I think it's been crossed. But yeah, Australia, they're one of those. They're one of those nations when it comes to cricket that does have a bit of spice to it. But I don't know what really to say to that. But the negative optics when around the world people are making massive sacrifices and in some countries, pro sport hasn't resumed, and negative headlines aren't good at a time like this. We need as much positivity as we can get, and I wouldn't be surprised if Cricket Australia are looking at the headlines and the negativity and are going to have to take some action again. This is an organisation that has been battered. Cricket Australia has been battered by the ball tampering scandal and the culture within the sport in Australia, and that has an impact. And Australia and New Zealand are in a very, very privileged position of allowing fans in attendance. Especially Australia, very privileged position about allowing fans in. Where I live, I can't go watch the sports that I want to watch. No fans allowed in attendance. My two favourite sports haven't resumed play. So South Americans in football, that's again a complicated issue. Soccer, if you're Australian or North American. But again, it's the actions of a minority that affect the majority. But it's again the optics. It's again how it comes across in the media and how it's reported. But you can't deny the fact of that as an Australian, you are basically saying your team are acting badly and your fan base is acting in a negative manner, and that's a problem, and that's a reflection on Australian society. A sport reflects the society that it's played in. That's my personal opinion. It's a social. You look at it, how a sport's fan base and a sport behaves itself, the players, the participants, the fans, is a reflection on the society that we live. And what I've seen with some of these sports resuming is a real, real negativity. And it highlights some of the negative things we have in our societies right now. There are other sports that I've watched, where there was a lot of positivity that came out of certain sports and the fan bases that follow those sports. But yeah, no, from what I've seen with the reports coming out, it's a negative look for Australia as a whole. Do I think the NHL will bring back nameplates for referee jerseys? That's an interesting one. I've grown up with the referees in the UK having nameplates. Referees in the UK have nameplates, names on the back of their jerseys and their number and their referee number as well. I don't know why the NHL got rid of that. Whether it was an optics decision to focus more on the products, the superstars, the players, so your Gretzky's, your Lemieux, your Jagers at the time, your Crosby's coming through, your Ovechkins, and trying to push the real product. But back in the day, the referees were also pretty well known and sort of legends in their own right. But I've in the country that I live in, I've grown up with the referees having their nameplates in the back for 2 decades plus, since I've been going to games. It's a cultural thing, I think. It is I think everyone wants to get a Wes McCauley jersey, but personally, I've seen some of his videos on social media, on YouTube and Facebook. They're quite funny. He is a character within, but I would say that was the NHL making a decision, and the AHL, the ECHL. That was the professional leagues in North America making a decision. For whatever reason, they said, "Well, we're going to drop the nameplates and take some of the heat off the referees as well." But Wes McCauley, yeah, he is a bit of a refereeing legend. He's got a good sense of humour. He's an icon of the sport. But I think that was a league-wide decision to do that. The officials' union obviously backed it because they would have had to have a vote on changes, to their protocols. But if there is a push for it, I mean, we're discussing advertising on NHL jerseys, and fans aren't overly happy with that. I've looked at the sponsors on the helmets. You barely notice them. But as a European, as a Brit, my jersey collection is on the channel. I've got NHL jerseys and I've got British jerseys, and the British jerseys, for the most part, are covered absolutely covered in adverts. And when I've been to games, some of the teams that I've seen play, you can't work out what their team colours actually are. But that's a result of the finances of the sport. I think on the side of will we see sponsors on jerseys, I'm not really sure how the NHL has to be very, very careful. While fans are not allowed in attendance in large numbers, there are certain areas like the Florida Panthers are going to have fans in attendance. Will we actually notice any fans at the BBNT Centre? I don't know, but I will say this: the NHL is losing money this year. Without fans being there, and without the great US TV deal, the NHL needs money. Hence the uh, sponsors on the helmets. We've already got the sponsors on the boards. We've got the sponsors on the ice in limited numbers. You look at European ice hockey; it's uh, it, it, you can't even tell where the player the face-off dots are. It's it's a debating point, but as a European, I'm used to sponsorship on jerseys. I'm used to sponsorship on the ice. I'm used to you know the optics of it, and I'm not a big fan of it. But we understand as fans over here, there is less money in the sport. Um, but on the North American side of things, it's a cultural thing as well. They're not. I can see fan pushback. Uh, you the NHL has to be careful how it deals with increasing different sponsors. It's a slippery slope, but you go back to the 80s, there was no sponsors on the boards, so it has been drip fed into the league. Uh, well, we'll have to look at and see what the NHL governors board of governors next meeting discusses. There was the North American fan base, as I say, is not keen on sponsors on sports jerseys. The MLS, they try and avoid as many sponsors on jerseys as possible, and that's the sport I think with the most sponsors slapped on jerseys. Same with Major League Rugby. If you are getting into rugby union again, there's a fair few sponsors on the jerseys. Again, they try and avoid it as much as possible. But I will say this: you have to be pragmatic in the situation. The NHL is losing money this season, and they have to be pragmatic. But we'll see what happens. I mean, from all that I've seen and read, fans aren't happy with the jerseys being on the ice, being covered in sponsors. I think there will be fan pushback, and if that then affects jersey resales and merchandise sales, the NHL may have to think about other ways of advertising. But we'll see what happens in the coming years. Whether the helmet sponsors stay with the sponsors on the helmets, whether that's a long term thing or a short term stopgap to fill the funding gap from the lack of fans. But I've noticed as time has gone on, there's more sponsors on football jerseys in this country, in the UK, soccer jerseys for non-Europeans, rugby union, rugby league, cricket. There are more and more sponsors getting their way in to sport, and they want their brand as an image on the jersey, on the shorts now. That football sponsors on the actual pitch itself, they're doing in certain leagues, in certain positions on the edge of the field. You have it in rugby union, you have it in rugby league. To a point, we'll see what happens. But I think teams and leagues, they need to fill the funding gap from the lack of fans. And not on international jerseys. No, there are no sponsors on international jerseys at this current time. I don't think FIFA have signed off on that yet. Wait and watch this space. In the Six Nations, you will see sponsors on rugby union jerseys. I think all rugby union nations now have sponsors on their jerseys. If you watch a Six Nations match, The only tournament that does not have sponsors on jerseys in rugby union is the World Cup. So that's the only one that doesn't have sponsors on the jerseys is in rugby union is the World Cup. On the NRL needing to grow the sport well, you can put that down to Todd Greenberg. The weak governance that the NRL has had for a very, very long time has hindered the sport. The wastage of money has hindered the sport. The bloated organisation that the NRL has hindered the sport. I think the sport itself as a product is brilliant. I think Peter V'landys and him being in charge of the commission, he's done a lot in the last 12 months to get the sport up and running again. On the side of the NRL growth, I have the NRL website as the NRL.com where I watch the games. It's fully legitimate. It's fully paid. The TV deal overseas, you could argue could be better. But if you look at domestically, the TV arrangements that the NRL has in place is far better than what the Super League has here, and has been for a very long time. Is there a conflict of interest in the World Cup? I think it's always been the case. It's always been the case. The only when you have the Rugby Championship and the Six Nations, and then the Tier 2 nation competitions such as the America's Rugby Championship, the nations have their sponsors. But when it comes to the World Cup, when teams qualify for the World Cup and they play, if you watched the Japan World Cup, there was no sponsors on any of the international jerseys at all. And I think that is for a variety of agreements and reasons. I'm not sure what the commercial arrangements are in regards to that, but it's always been the case when it comes to World Cup rugby union, there's no sponsors. Same with football as well. Same with football, international football, soccer. When it comes to the internationals, there is no sponsors on jerseys. Training gear, yes. Training gear, yes. Actual match-worn jerseys, no. Again, I think it's to do with the international agreements with the governing bodies and TV partners and sponsors and all that. It's weird. I think Peter V'landys has done a very, very, very good job, and Andrew Abdo, who was brought in as NRL CEO, has done a pretty understated, under the radar job. They've done very, very well in a very short space of time. Todd Greenberg, I mean, oh God, the way the sport was handled under his and the league was handled under his governorship was shocking. Poor governance for a long time hindered the NRL. And when we found out during the suspension of the season back in March and April that the players were willing to take pro-rated salaries and pay cuts and reduced pay and all that, were willing to take sacrifices. The Players Union went to the NRL to say, look, can we access the player retirement fund to access some funds for players and clubs, and they found a third of the money that had been agreed with a contractual agreement. So this is actually where it comes to fraud. It wasn't in the NRL player retirement fund for access at this crisis. I think that was the moment where Todd Greenberg had to go. He went shortly after. There was what's been reported is the clubs had lost faith in him, but I think when that came out, that money had been misappropriated at the time, and then when the clubs were asking for emergency payments as well, and they were underpaid, admittedly not by a lot of money, but they were underpaid. Those financial decisions and the financial mismanagement and misappropriation of funds and missed payments from the NRL to the players, to the clubs, he didn't have a leg to stand on. His contract was due to be up for discussion and renewal in February. Peter V'landys basically said, we're going to hold off on that. We're probably not going to give him a contract extension past this season. Then the pandemic came. Todd Greenberg had a chance to extend his stay by a year or two and rebuild trust. He went the other way. Long term, how long does Andrew Abdo stay in the position? There's a few people who are a bit unsure about him because he's South African, he's not Australian, but he's from outside the sport looking in. I think that's possibly the best way to organise. And he seemed to have a great working relationship with the 16 clubs, with the players, with the club administrators, with the fans as well. There seems to be a more positive uh, relationship between Abdo and Greenberg. But and Peter Volanders is a tough customer. He he got stuck in with getting the game back up and running. He had meetings with government at national and regional level to get the protocols in place to get the game resumed. He anglicised his name. He's Greek. He's Greek or Greek, but he's done a very very good job. He's a hard taskmaster, but we'll see how long he sticks around for. I think in the short to medium term, they're the right people to lead the sport forward, and they're going to leave it in a much stronger position than when they found it. This is going back pre-pandemic, the governance, the misappropriation, the stagnation of the game. Regardless of rule changes, is how the game was governed. I think there was massive problems financially. The game was badly governed for a very, very long time. I think they are going the right direction. What AHL, ECHL jersey designs do you like the most? I haven't really looked at a lot of AHL and ECHL jerseys, if I'm honest. I like the Tucson Roadrunners. That's quite a cool design. I like that. I like the Manitoba Moose. And the Providence Bruins is basically the Boston Bruins with just a P, but it's a pretty standard, solid design as a jersey. It works quite well as the affiliate of Boston Providence. It works very, very well. The Phantoms, the Philadelphia Flyers affiliate, they have a pretty neat jersey as well. There's a couple of good jerseys in there, but this is the problem with the AHL and the ECHL. They don't have a great overseas fan base in outside of North America. I have seen AHL and ECHL jerseys in the UK with hockey fans, but again, these are leagues, that are heavily reliant on fans and attendance. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the AHL and ECHL this coming season, and how they play, because they are crucial to the NHL as well as the NHL is crucial to them because of the two-way contracts, development players going down for rehabilitation stints. It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But those are two leagues that could use a bit more exposure globally, if not nationally, and a bit more exposure with some better media rights deals and better exposure to the wider sporting audience. But the AHL is a good level of hockey. The ECHL, I mean, they're two good leagues. They're not bad leagues to watch. If you think about it, they're not a bad standard of play. It's a pretty solid standard of play. But the NHL dominates the headlines, and the lesser leagues, the smaller leagues, don't get enough discussion, enough exposure. And there's some pretty good stories that come out of the AHL and UCHL players and teams and things like that. And they are very historical. I've looked at the AHL. I've looked at the UCHL. There's a fair. It's a pretty decent standard of hockey. But you got the SPHL. You had all sorts. Mason Mount, his natural position is a chance to display it again, and used to get some social media. No, I don't know what's going on. Chelsea is a team where I don't think they've got the best formation. I don't think they've settled on their team. You can argue about Lampard is the right man or wrong man for the job, but he is a good young talent. He's developing his craft. Werner is having a tough season, but he's come over from Germany. He was in a system that worked for him over there. He's struggling for a bit of confidence. But this is the problem with social media and the abuse. It doesn't matter that he's white in English. It's just the abuse that when a player has a bad game, I wouldn't say they're not well. You can say they're not working out. Are they not adapting to the tactics? Are they being played out of position? They are lacking confidence. The but the social media abuse that they're getting. I mean, these are young lads, and they are in a privileged position playing, professional level. But I think this is the problem with social media. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have this debate about, the abuse they're facing online. Didn't really have it. And yet we're discussing this on social media, the irony. And I feel sorry for these young players because this is their career path. They've chosen to be sportsmen, and that's fair enough. They're young, they are talented. This has been proven with their previous seasons and their player develop. How they developed as players, and getting recognition by scouts. There's a reason why Timo Werner is at Chelsea. He really did very, very well in the Bundesliga. He's not a bad player. He's not a bad player. Yeah, he's not playing well right now, but I could go and look at any player throughout history and say, oh, that's a down season, or they didn't have a couple of good games there. And you could argue about that. Messi at international level, he sometimes fails to live up to what he does at Barcelona. I will say this: I think the abuse that athletes, I'm going to say athletes in a wider sense, not just football players, but athletes get when they've done nothing overly wrong, in the sense that they haven't misbehaved off the field, they haven't had any negative headlines associated with them, but they have a couple of bad games, or they're having a bit of an off season, and the abuse they're getting, it's becoming more and more common. But Chelsea is a fan base that has quite a toxic element to it and has done for quite some time. And I think social media this is one of the negatives of it. And they have no recourse. They have no response to this really, because they're in the public eye. They're open to criticism from the media, and it's going to be interesting. Lots of young players like Tyler Madden in between the NHL, in between NHL already, and not NHL already, that could use some valuable minutes in the NHL right now to keep growing until they get a chance. They can't right now. That's what it sucks about the whole situation. Yeah, with the AHL announcing that its season's going to start next month, and the ECHL having teams saying they're not going to resume play this season, saying we're going to just mothball for a year, has caused a lot of problems. Again, they're only affiliate teams. They're not, this is a situation where not all the European leagues have resumed either, and that means a lot of players are not getting game time. It doesn't matter if you NHL, World Championships, just player development in general. I think, it is a problem, and I think the NHLPA and the NHL. Again, no uniform thinking there. But you look at the situation in North America, and some states, the situation is better than others. Some provinces in Canada, the situation is better than others. There is no universal policy going forward. The border closure is another thing that's causing headaches over in the US and Canada. On a sporting front, but yeah, it is a problem that these players aren't getting the AHL or ECHL time if they're developing players that have recently been drafted, and if they've got players returning from injury or players just playing out their careers, they can't play, which is a problem. Which means the taxi squad situation. It's going to be interesting to see how the taxi squad situation works. We're already seeing Tampa finding loopholes to get around the salary cap by demoting and promoting team players to and from the taxi squad. Tyler Johnson is an example. The situation with the AHL not playing for another month and the ECHL reducing the number of teams that are going to play this year is a concern about the lower levels of the sport going forward. And then you've got the other minor leagues around the US and Canada, and then you've got the junior leagues as well. There is a concern going forward about player development, the health of the sport, the finances of the sport. the viability of the sport in certain locations, even though Canada's hockey mad and there's certain states in the US that are hockey mad. The viability, it's going to be interesting the next 6 to 12 months, and then longer term, in the next couple of years, the structures of the NHL, AHL, ECHL. It's going to be very, very interesting. And with Seattle joining as well, some of these players that are on two-way contracts could be, picked up as free. I think Seattle are allowed so many free agents in the expansion draft. They've had to change the rules in the expansion draft as well. The whole situation is fluid at the moment. But I do feel sorry for those players who aren't able to play, haven't made the taxi squad, but the AHL hasn't resumed, the ECHL hasn't resumed, or they may have been on a team that, like the ECHL, where their parent team is saying, we're not going to play this season. No, they may be on an entry-level contract with their draft team from the NHL. Do they look at Europe? Do they just focus on their personal training and keeping fit? A whole load of questions. Do I think the Olympics will happen? Again, that's a fluid situation with the Olympics. There's growing calls from inside Japan to just not have it all together. And then there's also growing calls within Japan and the wider community globally to say postpone it another year. But then that causes a clash with the Winter Olympics and the Qatar World Cup. And I think the same with Rugby League World Cup as well. They don't want to have a clash with the World Cup in Qatar in 2022, football-wise, the FIFA World Cup. So there's a lot of pressure, especially on the Olympics. They're allowed less flexibility, I think, than some other major sporting events that are tournaments in regards to getting it hosted. We should have already been talking about some, great things that could have happened in the summer in regards to the Olympics, and all that seems to be coming out is delay it, cancel it. I don't think the amount of money the Japanese government has put into the venues, the preparation, the advertising, working with their corporate and broadcast partners, I can't see the Japanese government being happy to cancel. I think that would cost them a lot of money, and they put a lot of political capital into, a lot of political energy into the getting the Olympics, hosting the Olympics. It's been a major domestic and international policy of the Japanese. That could be a problem for the Japanese government, but there are growing calls in some of the opposition parties and domestically that they don't want it to take place, or they push it back a year. But they're desperate to avoid a clash with the Qatar World Cup because of broadcasting revenue, sponsorship revenue, and because you've got the under-23s football tournament, the Olympic football tournament, that'll be a clash with the World Cup in Qatar, and they don't want that. So will it happen? 50-50. I think the Japanese government have boxed themselves in a corner where if they go ahead, they're going to go ahead. There are growing calls to cancel, but the Japanese government have basically said, no, we're going to forge ahead with this event. We're not going to cancel. There's been a couple of US athletes that have had a few doping violations. That's never far from the headlines when it comes to track and field athletics. I think it was a female athlete as well who failed to turn up to a test or had some breach of something and got an extended ban. But yeah, blocking journalists on Twitter. Oh, well, Twitter, the cesspool of humanity. I only use Twitter to basically upload my YouTube videos so I can reach a wider audience. I don't really go on Twitter anymore because I just avoid all the arguments, really. Twitter is just a toxic environment. There's nothing positive about it, in my view. I tend to try and avoid Twitter sphere. The only time I really go on, the only really time I go on Twitter is to post my YouTube videos to the videos that I upload and link them in. But I'm slowly weaning myself from doing that. I don't put the live streams up on Twitter anymore, so people can rewatch them if they've missed the live stream. But when an athlete and journalists are waging a war of words on social media, it's kind of embarrassing. But the fact that you know uh, you're told to, as an athlete, as a professional athlete, you are given dates that you have to turn up for doping control. If you fail to do that, you're risking getting banned or suspended from your sport. It doesn't matter if it's professional cycling, professional. Same with we could have this debate about rugby union, rugby league. I mean, there's been a couple of rugby league players who failed tests. I remember Rio Ferdinand failed to turn up to doping control, and he got banned from playing football for a while. So, you know, there are rules there for a reason. But it is what it is. But this is not the first time an athlete has failed to turn up to doping control. It won't be the last. But the rules are in place for a reason. Athletes regularly do it, and regularly get caught. I think you have to have. I think there's 3 strikes and then you're banned or something. If you fail to, it's like a failure to appear at court. It makes your offence worse. If you have a traffic fine or a traffic violation and you fail to appear, that goes against you. Continued fail to appear, your fine gets bigger. It just makes things worse. Uh, yeah, I think Twitter is just a cesspit. It really is. Um, it's the same as any social media. I think social media at times it has had some positive impacts, absolutely, but I'm slowly. I haven't seen the letterbox. No, I haven't checked it out. I haven't, but I'll check it out. I will check it out. I didn't. I haven't really got round to it, but I will have a little look at it. I know I've got your link saved, so don't worry. I will have a little look at letterbox. I'll see what it's all about, but I haven't really had the time with work and all that. But yeah, I'll have a little look at I'll have a look at it this afternoon, my time this evening. I've got to tidy up my flat anyway, so I'll just have a little look at it. But we'll see what happens. Yeah, but no, with social media, there's been some good positives that's come out of it, and there's been a lot of negatives, and yeah, we're using social media now, but yeah. Uh, I've got Discord, but I barely use Discord. I was on a couple of forums. I'm on a Jets fan forum on Discord. I find Discord just as toxic as Twitter, if I'm brutally honest. You just need to get a couple of bad apples in a conversation. It descends quite quickly. Um, on yeah, on the side of social media and sport, I think it's had a mixed bag. It makes the athletes more approachable. There's no denying that, but at the same time, it opens them up for a whole heap of abuse that I think they don't need and don't deserve. Because I look at it and I look at, especially, I'm more team sport focused. We know that. I prefer my team sports. I prefer my motorsport, and yeah, it just opens up a whole can of worms. Yeah, because you're going to have a team of, let's say, rugby league or ice hockey players or rugby union players, and they're playing a game, or football players, and there's that one player who has a bad game, has a turnover, has a turnover, opposition score, um, has a couple of bad games, similar mistakes, and then social media side of things get on it, give him some abuse. Then you have that individual who misbehaves off the field. We are human after all, but they are human. They are human beings, and they're going to make mistakes. And then they're roasted by social media. It's trial by social media. I don't know. If this social media, we'll call it a social media decade, last 10, 15 years, how many positives and negatives have we actually had? And from what I've seen, especially over the last couple of years, Jesus, it is a absolute shower of shit. Um, it's an absolute shower of shit. I see more negatives than positives. In my personal opinion, I see more negatives than positives with social media, especially in the last couple of years with what's happened over the last 12 months with the pandemic and I've had to go to work. I mean, my job is a essential key worker, so I have to go to work. I have no choice in the matter. But a lot of people are stuck at home. A lot of people have been on furlough. A lot of people have lost their jobs, and yeah, social media has not necessarily been something. I know certain clubs and certain teams and certain athletes have come off social media. I don't. I don't. Oh, look, I got my Facebook warning for saying that Americans are retarded. They elected Donald Trump as president. Yeah, no, they're retarded. But I got a Facebook suspended ban, and I just give up. I give up. I've disagreed with so many decisions that Facebook and Twitter have made that I've just given up. I've given up. I think sports fans are a toxic bunch. I think politically it's just vile, and there are certain minority groups, pressure groups, who are forcing an agenda which doesn't need to be forced. They're trying to find persecution where it doesn't exist. And you can't have a debate with these people, which was the whole point of Twitter. Was you could have a reasonable debate, and no, because you can't. Oh god, the cancel culture side of things, it's ridiculous. But I don't really care. I don't really watch much TV anymore anyway, because most of the stuff I enjoy either has run its course, as in certain TV series are not broadcast anymore. They've been cancelled. They've had their run. Um, you know, but no, I look at some of the. I try to avoid when I'm discussing things. When it comes to certain bits and pieces, I just give up. I've given up. I didn't report anything about Cavani's suspension. Uh, when Greg Clark stepped down, I got a load of crap online from, the left wing. A load of crap. Just gave up with it. I try to avoid certain topics, not because I don't want to talk about them, but I know that it's just not worth the aggravation, the hassle, the abuse. It's not worth it. This is a hobby for me. This is not like, if this was making me money, then yeah, I'll take it a bit more seriously. But I just enjoy discussing sport and looking at individual sporting moments, the history side of some of the stuff, previewing upcoming tournaments, one-off matches. I what I don't like is I'm in my mind. To me, I'm colorblind. I'm not actually colorblind. I can see in all spectrum, but I'm colorblind. If you know what I mean. I don't see a white person, a brown person, an Asian person. To me, they're people. Their background has got nothing to do with their ability on the field or on the ice or in the arena. Nothing. Nothing. I'm colorblind. I am pragmatic. I'm pretty flexible in my approach to the world. I'm pretty open-minded. I'm flexible and pragmatic. I am colorblind. What I find funny is the two extremes, the left and the right. Put loads of labels and stuff. It's like, no, dick and head. I'm just an average sports fan. I'm an average bloke in his early 30s, lives by himself, who enjoys sport. That's me. Um, I try and keep the politics off the channel. I try and keep um, I wouldn't say controversial channel, but I just try and avoid all the negativity. I mean, I look at what I see, which is a sports team doing well, a sports team doing badly, a manager doing well, a player developing well, a player under pressure, a manager under pressure, an athlete who's got suspended for a drugs test, for example. We can look at so and so's failed a doping test, or so and so player has been suspended for 4 games for violent conduct. So and so player in the NHL has been suspended for 2 games and fined $30,000 for repeat infringements, for whatever it may be. Evander Kane, yeah, we can discuss his bankruptcy because he is thinking about terminating his contract. How did he end up in this position? Was he badly advised? Possibly. Yeah, I mean, if you follow me on Facebook, yeah, some of my Facebook memes are just offensive. I don't care. I have humour, but when it comes to my sports fandom and stuff like that, I'm on a lot of sport forums. God, there's sports banter and there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek humour, and then there's just the vile stuff that I see. It's just pointless. It's pointless. It's depressing. It makes no logical sense. But I'm going to quickly check the sports headline while we're here, because now that it's a quiet moment in the stream and no one news join us, have a little look and see what's happening, at least in the UK domestically. Let's have a look at sport. And then I'll have a look at TSN and stuff like that. I'll have a look at North America, but let's have a look. See what's happening. Let's have a look. So I'm going to start with the UK sport, or European sport. Motherwell 1, Rangers 1 in Scotland. So if you follow the SPL, we've got the snooker, but I've really not got any love for snooker at the moment, especially with players like Bingham and Higgins who've been linked to match fixing and gambling breaches of playing. I just turn off. England closing on win in Sri Lanka despite losing 3 quick wickets, because we like a batting collapse when it comes to England cricket, by the way. Yeah, England like it. Here we go. 70 Australian Open tennis players, so this is the Australian Open, to isolate after COVID case on a 3rd flight. So this is something that I was talking about earlier. Let's have a little look about the Australian Open. So if you follow your tennis, this is quite interesting. Australian Open, 72 players to quarantine after another positive test on Melbourne flight. Bella Tomic is one of several players to have been seen exercising in their hotel room. So Tomic is 72 Australian Open players are now confirmed to the hotel rooms after a positive coronavirus test result on a 3rd flight bound for the tournament. 25 players thought to be mostly qualifiers, because there's qualifying tournaments as well, on board the flight from Doha in Qatar to Melbourne must isolate in their room for 14 days. Heather Watson is one of 47 players who were already quarantining, and some are frustrated by the confinement. Oh dear. Shame. Sorry, when high-profile sports athletes are complaining about I have to quarantine for 14 days, think how we felt for a year. Please, people. Tournament organisers said the players were already in quarantine hotels, so they already had this set aside in case of something like this happening. So the Australian Open has actually been quite pragmatic. An Australian Open statement said 1 positive COVID test has been returned from a passenger on a charter flight from Melbourne into Melbourne from Doha, which arrived on the 16th of January, 5:30 a.m. So that's technically 2 days ago for Australia. The passenger is not a member of the playing contingent and had tested negative before the flight. Could be a false positive. There were 58 passengers on the flight, including 25 players. I don't understand, right, why the organisers can't go, right, you guys have all played qualifiers, we'll charter private planes to get you to the Australian Open. But tennis has money. The ATP has money. This is ridiculous. At least 3 players said they might not have gone to the tournament if the rules had not been made clear to them. Organisers said the rules were clear and the event would begin as planned on the 8th of February. 3 other people tested positive for COVID on Saturday and 1 on Sunday. They had been on 2 charter flights bringing players to the tournament. Two-time winner Victoria Azarenka, Angelique Kerber, and Sloane Stephens, Japan's former Kei Nishikori, are among those affected. So these are high-profile players in both the men and women's game. Emma Kassar, Quarantine Commissioner for the State of Victoria. This is important. This is a government official from Australia. Said the people in the hotels, including one player, were breaching lockdown rules by opening the doors to communicate with those on their floor. Interesting. All players taking part in the competition had to test negative before boarding flights and then were placed in designated Australian open quarantine hotels in Melbourne and Adelaide. So they were going to have to quarantine anyway on entry to Australia. So I don't know what they're complaining about. Those who've not been confined to their rooms because of positive tests on their flights are allowed out for up to 5 hours per day on practice court. First Grand Slam of the year had already been hit by withdrawal of Roger Federer, but he was injured. And Andy Murray testing positive before flying, so he's out. So that's two high profile players already not playing and others kicking off. But yeah, so the Australian Open, 72 players quarantining. That's mental. What else we got? Former MotoGP boss Brivia appointed Alpine's racing director. It's not really. Oh, here we go. Talking about social media and sport. Now, this is a female sportsman, so this is going to create some interesting conversations. Eleanor Snowsill, Snowsill, is her name? She's speaks out about trolling of women's rugby players. Oh, here we go. It's been a tumultuous week for Eleanor Snowsill. On Wednesday, the postponement of the Women's Six Nations was announced. On Thursday, a 2-week break was declared for the Premier 15. So the women's game is basically in stasis. Women's rugby union is stopped. While the Wales and Bristol fly-off was coming to terms with so much uncertainty ahead, trolls on social media told her they did not care. And to be brutally honest, I don't really. But that's the thing. It's a shame that the women's game is being suspended, but at the same time, people are dying. So I'm running out of sympathy for some of these high-profile sports stars. And so the 31-year-old spoke on Twitter using I Care, a hashtag which has now been shared by several of the sport's biggest names. Snowsill wrote, "Do these men trolling articles about women's rugby generally think we're going to believe them when they say they don't care?" I think some women might not care either, but you know. Organisers aim to start the Women's Six Nations in spring or summer, but the postponement will affect preparations for the World Cup due to start in September. With most Premier 15s players being amateur, COVID-19 testing has not been possible in the league, so it was decided a break was necessary to stop the spread of the virus. Yeah, because you're mostly amateur, so you have jobs. And so while she finds herself in a precarious professional position, like so many others in the pandemic, Snowsill has also had to deal with ongoing social media trolling. She told BBC Sport relentless online abuse in August 2019 of the BBC Elite British Sportsman study found that 30% of female athletes have been trolled on social media. The abuse has not gone away, and although Snowsill says it does not affect her personally, she felt compelled to speak out and protect the stars of the sport. It does not bother me that these people don't care about our sport. And that's the problem why sport doesn't grow. What bothers me is the environment it creates. Young boys and girls looking at that post and saying, "Oh, people don't care about it." Yeah. This is not the first time a film rugby players have stood up for their sport. When Ireland used players to launch their men's kit, but models to launch the women's jersey in August, Wasps player Florence Williams tweet sparked a viral campaign. I'm Enough was used by players to discuss the issue of body image in women's rugby with Scotland. Rona Lloyd, one of several international to lend a voice to the cause. The fact that these hashtags are gaining so much momentum shows how far sport has come. People do care now enough to gather that momentum. It's a form of bullying, we've got to call it out for it. England Women World Cup winner Tamara Taylor tweeted, "Women's sport is sport, isn't it time to accept that?" Now, this is interesting. Bill Beaumont, who I'm not a big fan of governing rugby union, he used the hashtag in reference to a story on recently retired England international Katie Daly-McLean, calling the fly-off an inspiration for the next generation of girls and boys. Former men's Premiership player and Bristol Bears women assistant coach Tom Lindsay showed his support. He wrote, "Every day it's incredible this keep raising the bar." Look, I don't get me wrong. I don't mind women's rugby, but here's the thing: most of the women's rugby players are semi-pro at best, and they don't have testing in place. What would they rather care about, their health or playing a game and getting sick? But it shows social media. If she didn't care that much about the abuse she's receiving, why is she talking about it? it's got a negative impact. Social media has a negative impact. Personally, I don't mind women's rugby, but I've watched a few games. It's been kind of entertaining, if I'm honest. It is kind of entertaining. But I'll say this: I didn't know who half those people were that I was reading about. Not going to lie, they don't have a great big public consciousness, and that is down to the advertisers, down to the broadcasters, down to the teams that they play for. It's just down to the media partners and a whole load of other stuff. But I don't know. That was a social media thing. But let's have a look at some other sports headlines, because I said I would look at TSN. Let's have a look at TSN. Let's have a look at the TS. Let's have a look at the NHL actually. Let's have a look. Right, so the Minnesota Wild beat the Los Angeles Kings 4-3 in overtime. The Flames beat the Canucks 3-0. Sorry, Sean. The Canucks is shit this year. The Golden Knights beat the Ducks. Again, that's 2 wins they've had in a row against them. The Preds beat the Blue Jackets 5-2. The Rangers got their revenge on the Islanders with a similar scoreline that they received previously, 5-0. The Canadians hammered the Oilers 5-1. That's generally worrying. The Red Wings scored 4 goals. The Hurricanes scored the Maple Leafs beat the Senators. The Coyotes beat the Sharks 5-3. Devils beat the Bruins. Avalanche smashed the Blues the other night. Right, that's interesting. There's been some real big blowout scores in the NHL since it's resumed, by the way. Just saying that. There's been some massive blowouts. Absolutely insane. TSN. Let's have a look at TSN. See what's happening on the old TSN, because obviously I follow the North American sports side of things. Right, let's have a look. The Bills have beaten the Ravens, AFC Championship game. Let's have a look. Yeah, Buffalo Bills. Yeah, as I said, they could do it. The Packers beat the Rams. Marner has 3 points. Thornton scores first goal as a Leaf. Why is it the first NHL article on TSN is Maple Leafs? I don't care about Maple Leafs. Stutzel's first NHL goal comes from one-timer. Petrie, Tar each score a pair as Canadians dominate the Oilers. Markstrom shut out Leafs Flames over Canucks. That is painful if you're a Canucks fan. Markstrom shutting you out. NFL Packers advance NFC Championship game. Some of basketball. Holloway defeats Qatar in one-sided UFC main event. Habib open to potential UFC return. Some more basketball stuff. Combined 85 years of age, Drew Brees and Tom Brady are set to duel possibly for the last time. Here we go. How will a 14-day quarantine affect players' preparations for Australian Open? That's going to be interesting. That's a video article, so I can't play that. Bar down. Great, so I can't watch that video because I'm not in the right region. Oh God, that's TSN. Let's see what. That's interesting. Some of the articles on there. Everything's Leafsnet. Oh God. Yeah, the first NHL article was a Leafs article. That's annoying because it is, but it is good to see Joe Thornton getting his first goal. Marner's having a good start, so it's not all about the Matthews show and Tavares over there. So there's some other positive news coming out of hockey that isn't that. Women's NBA, it loses money. It doesn't make enough money. Crowd numbers are low. You have to look at the finances. Just look at the facts and figures. Take the I couldn't name you any women's basketball players in the women's NBA, but you look at the actual finances of the sport, the average attendance, the viewership figures on TV. It's not great. It's not great. It's propped up by the NBA. They barely make a profit. So there is that argument commercially there. That's my thought on that. I'm fine if our team ends up choking this year. Benny needs to get fired already with everything he's done. A lot of Canucks fans aren't fans of Jim Benning. I'm not a Canucks fan, so I can't comment on the Canucks fan base. But it does. To me, it doesn't seem to matter who is the GM in Vancouver land. They get roasted by the fan base. Personal opinion. Leafs now. Everything's Leafs now. Do I like the new NHL conferences? There isn't any. It's the four divisions. There's no conference play this year. The next conference realignment is Arizona just moved from the Pacific to the Central for next season because of Seattle's entry to the league. But this year it's just the four divisions. An all-Canadian division is beautiful: Pacific, Central, and East. It mixes things up. It mixes some of the traditional rivalries up. But you just play games in your division. Playoffs will be interesting because there's no conference play, so that'll be very, very interesting. The Final Four, how that plays out, and how the playoffs are structured after that. We may see, the plan is obviously Arizona goes to the Central this coming season in 2021-22 with Seattle joining. That's the only divisional move that is in normal times. In what we're seeing now, yeah, they've had to come up with these divisions because they've had no choice. But we'll see what happens. The WNBA attendance are better. Well, yes, they have NBA support, and it is a collegiate sport. There is obviously basketball is one of the most popular sports in the US and Canada, but yeah, the facts and figures speak for themselves. It's nothing to do with misogyny on my part. The Women's National Basketball Association doesn't make money. It struggles every year to break even. Few teams make a profit. For the most part, they are propped up by the NBA. That's just fact. No misogyny there. That's just fact. And the British Basketball League is, well, irrelevant, in my opinion, in the sense that the quality level's crap, attendance figures are crap, and the media deal they have is crap. So the only way they're going to improve is encouraging more people to play, and I just can't see that happen. The level of play is not good enough. The fans like good things. I hate the shit things he does, and he's good enough to bring them to the next level. Well, I think Jim Benning. I think he's got a tough gig in Vancouver as GM. I do. But he's got a tough gig. But I think any GM in the NHL has got a tough gig, especially the next couple of years. It's going to be headaches. There's going to be some really weird trades, buyouts, free agency. Lots going to happen with the NHL. I don't. Well, I've got friends who play women's hockey in this country, who play for the national side, and have played for national championship sides and all that. So I know people have actually played the game. It's the money side of it. Let's not pretend. Forget the Twitter trolls. It's the money side. It's the actual money side of things. It's the revenue. It's the fan gate receipts. Forget the quality of play. Forget that they're less skilled and they have a different set of rules because there's no hitting, there's no fighting technically allowed. It's basically a different sport, women's hockey. But I will say this: you have to look at it pragmatically. You have to look at it financially. It just doesn't make money. It's an expensive sport to run. It doesn't make money. Sod social media. It's economically not viable, and their demands for money. They obviously haven't studied economics. It's just a thing. So unless you actually get government funding, it's not going to work. Not going to work. But there we go. How do the WSL and the Women's Premiership 15s fund themselves? The WSL is fully professional. They have a TV deal. They also are linked mostly to the men's teams. So Man City, for example, they can get paid because of ownership. It's all. I don't know. They've got sponsorship deals, they've got TV arrangements, they obviously get game receipts, merchandise sales. Women's Super League is very, very similar to the Premier League in the sense that ownership, sponsorship deal, TV deal. Just they make less. And they are starting to make a profit, actually. So it is starting to have a positive impact. Again, social media. I don't know why fans, and this also includes female fans as well, not just male fans. They're trying to compare the sports, or the women's equivalent to the men's equivalent. Stop doing that. It's a different style of football. It's a different style of ice hockey. It's a different style of whatever sport you're playing. Stop trying to compare women's football, soccer to men's. Just stop. Just stop doing it. Doesn't help anything. And the social media side of it, I don't. If I was a female athlete, I wouldn't have social media. I wouldn't have Twitter. I'll just get rid of it. Personally, I would just get rid of it. But yeah, they don't get the same level because they're not the quality level. The sport is their version of the sport is in its infancy in comparison. Oh yeah, it has turned into the fuck Twitter party. It has. If I was a sports star now, I wouldn't have Twitter. Let's just say that. Doesn't matter if I was male, female, whatever. I wouldn't have social media. It's just a toxic pile of shit. I wouldn't. You're just opening yourself up for a can of worms that you don't want. Yeah, I don't watch the women's NBA. I don't watch basketball in general, to be fair, and that's me being brutally honest. I'm not a basketball fan. I'm not saying it's a crap sport at all. These WNBA players are far healthier and fitter than me. I had to give up playing rugby because I had too many injuries, and I'm feeling the effects of these injuries now. I've had multiple concussions. I've buggered my shoulder. I've buggered my knees. If I had carried on playing, I would have ended up in a wheelchair. Same if I carried on playing football as a goalkeeper. I would have been on crutches. I'd have had to have multiple knee surgeries. I do need multiple surgeries, but because of COVID, I can't have the medical care that I need. But yeah, I don't make videos saying this sport's crap. I don't. There's no point. I look at the history of sport. I look at the champions, the losers. I mean, I've done videos on like the worst teams in history. Like this team is a tire fire. If you watch my Western Suburb Magpies NRL video, I might do a Brisbane Broncos 2020 season breakdown about their shocking season, and I will. It will be fun. But I look at things in sports history like Brecon City not winning a single game all season a couple of years ago and getting I think 5 points. They got like 5 draws or something. They didn't win a single game. I just don't get if you don't like a sport, don't watch it. Simple. If I don't get why people have to knock someone else's attempt. If you don't like women's sport, you just don't watch it. It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. If you don't like a sport, just don't. I don't know why people make women's NBA hate videos. I don't. I really don't. Do I rate basketball? Do I like basketball? I'm indifferent. Do I think they're great athletes? Absolutely. What they can do, I could never do. That's one reason why I'm not a big fan of basketball. I just didn't enjoy playing it at school. I will casually watch a game. That doesn't mean I hate the sport. I just don't particularly enjoy the sport. I have no love for the sport, but I have no hate for the sport. You know what I mean? But I'm not going to go out there and knock women's sport. I've actually posted a lot of videos praising women's sport, and I get abused for it. I don't understand why. And I always say to people, stop comparing it to the men's equivalent. Like seriously, treat it as a brand new sport and a brand new thing. I have no idea why there is people in a position. They can criticise its finances. I've regularly criticised the women's NBA, the WNBA's finances, and it not making money and it being a financial black hole, which the NBA is supporting. That's a commercial decision that the NBA decided to do. They decided to pump money into something that doesn't make money. Okay, fine. Um, yeah, I do agree. There are a lot of unlikable players in the NBA. There's a lot of players who have a chip on their shoulder and a bad attitude. Um, I'm not dismissing that they're misogynist, but I'm saying from my own point of view, I don't understand why people do it. Why hate on something? If you don't like it, don't watch it. It's that's my thought on it. I personally don't troll YouTube and scroll through trying to find um, basketball videos. The fact that there are people doing it does show that there's a problem. The women's NBA doesn't make money. In my point of view, if I'm doing a video on the women's NBA, I'm not going to hate on the players for being athletes and you know and trying their best to improve. I've got nothing against what the athletes do, but what I'm saying is I'm not dismissing the possibility, but at the same time, the media and the fan forums have created a way of thinking is the best way I can describe it, where you've got to criticize well, I think I, what I've seen on social media has worried me absolutely. What I keep telling people who view this channel and view my videos when I'm doing women's sport is stop comparing it to the men's equivalent, for the love of God. Seriously, just stop comparing it to the men and women's equivalents. Stop comparing them. Treat it as a brand new sport that you've never watched before. Unfortunately, people got it in, sports fans got it ingrained in their minds that um, it's they're trying to compare. And it doesn't work, and they are trying to compare the women's NBA to the men's, the mainstream NBA. You have to treat it as a completely different sport. You have to treat it and be pragmatic about it. Unfortunately, I don't get. Look, I'm not a netball fan, partly because it is a sport aimed for women and girls. It is. End of discussion. Um, the the professional netball league in this country is doing great things. I've seen a lot of positive feedback and it's got a better TV deal. It's getting better sponsorship. The crowd numbers have been growing year on year, but it is a sport aimed at women. It is a sport aimed for the women sports fan audience that feel sidelined and marginalised by mainstream sport. That's how I think they're targeting they know what their fan base is, and it's at youth level. It is a sport played by girls, not by boys. Plain and simple. But I still don't. But basketball fans hating a different. It's a different sport altogether. I don't understand why they have to then go, well, this sport's shit. You don't even follow the women's basketball, so now you're targeting another sport. I don't. It's there is clearly an undercurrent here, where women's sport seems to just get crap. I don't see it that way. I watch motorsport. There are women who compete against men in rallying, touring cars, motocross, superbikes. I've seen it in NASCAR, IndyCar, GT racing club, and they still get hate. Why is it? Because they're better than many of the men on the grid? I don't know. I don't know. I just look at it as a sports fan, dissecting the matches and the leagues that I support and I watch. And yeah, I will watch women's football and I will watch women's rugby. And I'm fully aware that the women's game is not on the same level as the men's game in skill, physicality, technique, and ability. I'm fully aware of that. Uh, yeah, I can see there's some pushback against some of these sports being pushed in a sense. Yeah, netball and field hockey, women have a pretty free reign in that because field hockey, there is a very, very um, structured youth system, professional system, and thankfully we're very, very good. Um, And for the most part, for most of the female fans I've come across, again, they follow the men's games more. They do. I'm of an open, pragmatic mind. Will I watch women's rugby? Yes. Will I watch women's rugby league? Yes. Women's football or soccer, depending where you are in the world? Yes. If there is a female rally driver, motocross rider, MotoGP, superbikes, whatever, motorsport we're talking about, will I watch them? Yeah. Do I see them as a female driver? No. Do I see them as a driver? Yes. Does the gender drop out of it? Absolutely. I have no issue. I don't see why there's all this hate. I don't. I really don't. But at the same time, I don't like we're going to just drive this equality agenda. Equality comes from the bottom. It doesn't come by being forced. It comes from a natural development and a natural interest. This is what I gathered works the best. If you're trying to force a diversity agenda, you actually create more negativity and more division than unity. If, however, you were to do your research and look at participation and look at fan base, you might see a different response. If they were to properly survey fans of the sports that they're trying to push the women's agenda, right? They're trying to push the equality agenda, I think they will be very, very surprised with the response. Because it's been a forced agenda rather than a natural progression of young girls and women going, no, I want to play professional rugby. I want to, play rugby league. I want to, racing motorsport. You'll find a different response. You will find a different response. I think these are knee-jerk reactions to a minority of people on social media and a political left-wing movement. Again, a minority movement. The majority of fans, I don't think, would care if it was men or women participating in the sport they're watching. They really don't. But it's honestly, some of the fan forums and sports forums I'm on, I am generally worried that women are hiding their identity online. This is a known fact. There's clearly the fan forums are very well. Some of the banter I wouldn't class as banter. I would class as outright vile. Whatever's being said, written, spoken. And the problem is, especially with European football, I think I've been to many a match, and I will tell you now, it's not a family-friendly environment. Even doesn't matter how much the PR. It's a family game. Let's do these community things. Trust me, when you're in the stands, it's not a very family-friendly environment. It's not particularly a pleasant experience at a football ground. Ice hockey is a bit different from what I've seen. There's a lot of families, a lot of. When I was going to games until our local arena shut and the team had to relocate just up the road, mind, but there was a lot of female fans watching the men's game. Then you watch the women's game, not a lot of fans. That's my opinion and what I've seen. Cricket, men's cricket, a good mix. A lot of female fans when I went to Lords when I was a teenager. When I went to Twickenham to watch the double headers back in the day, again, a lot of female fans. So clearly, there's a trend here. When it comes to European football, however, and especially what I've seen going to matches around England, no, there is clearly a culture within the sport. Then you look at it, and I said this about ice hockey. A lot of women watching the men's game, watching the senior men's team. Women's game, you're looking to try and find fans of any gender. I think I've just summed it up. What fans want to watch. Field hockey, on the other hand, Mm. Well, I don't know. I think what I've seen by going to matches and interacting with fans of other teams, ice hockey. There's a lot of women's female fans of ice hockey watching the men's senior men's games. There are a lot of women involved in the administration of the sport and club administration and fundraising and fan groups. Women led for the men's game. I'm going to leave that point there. Rugby union, when I was a member of my local rugby club, we do have a women's team, a very successful women's team, by the way. They would watch the men's game more than the women's game, but I would still put my head down and see the women's team play because my friends were playing. But at the same time, I saw more female fans watching the senior men's teams play rather than the women's. It's something that I've noticed. The field hockey, that is a different kettle of fish, but that's more played at university. There's more of a university-based game before the professional ranks. There's a link to the universities, and I think universities have a few more level-headed fan base. Just putting it out there. I'm just putting that out there. But what I've noticed in my fandom of sport, watching and going to games, we do see a lot of female fans at certain sports, but then football in this country or soccer in North America, mate, it's completely different. It is a very toxic atmosphere where it's not a family friendly atmosphere. If I would call it that. There's a fair bit of negative. Yeah. I for me, women's field hockey and men's field hockey, it's university based. It's got a strong university link. I think that's where the fan base is a bit more, for the most part, from what I've gathered online, a bit more level headed. But all the sport, the motorsport side of things, women can compete against men at all classes of motorsport. You'll notice in F1 there are no female drivers, but in IndyCar there have been female drivers in the last decade. Rallying, female drivers and co-drivers, it's a common practice. Not many, but there are quite a few. Motorcycle racing, there's more and more, and women's motocross as well. There is a growing number of female riders in motocross. On saying that, this is what I've noticed in sport of things that I've gone to. Football, didn't see a lot of women at football matches as a teenager when I was going on my little FA Cup odyssey for a couple of seasons. I went to a lot of FA Cup games just as a neutral, just going to games with my granddad. Didn't notice a lot of female fans. I'm not going to hide the fact. Not a lot of female fans. And I went all around England watching the FA Cup and regular league games as well. I went to a lot of games at Brentford, a lot of games at Watford, a lot of games at Reading, Southampton, Fulham, QPR. I think we did a Swindon Town, sort of Ipswich play, Portsmouth. I've been all over the southeast of England watching football for a good 4-season stretch. Not a lot of female fans. There is no hiding that. Rugby union, ice hockey, cricket, different kettle of fish. That's what I've seen as a fan going. Senior men's games, cricket, ice hockey, rugby union, a lot of female fans. Football, not a lot of female fans. They're there. Don't get me wrong. There's a fair few who go, but a percentage of the crowd, it's a lot less. I've just summed up football's problem or soccer's problem. Rugby union, the women's game is growing. It is growing. And at club level, at the lower levels, yes, they do get a good following. I'll admit to that. I've seen it. Women's ice hockey, having been a hardcore fan my entire life, I've been to a lot of the men's games. There are a lot of female fans and families who go. A lot of female fans. I would say about 40% of people who went to the Bracknell Bees matches before the rink shut and team moved to Slough. That is a place, not Slough, it's Slough. Slough, horrible place. 40% of the crowd, including the away fans here, the club, the hockey community, as in British ice hockey fan base. The fan forums run by women. The supporters clubs run by women. A lot of ownership and administration of the sport run by women. Um, they're, I think ice hockey has an opportunity in North America to try and follow suit. There seems to be a cultural undercurrent of negativity there, but I can see it working. If they were to start the Canadian Women's Hockey League again after COVID, with both NHL having one like an AHL team, it could. It could. From what I've seen as a hockey fan and as a sports fan, the sports I've listed do have a huge proportion of their fans female. And yes, women's teams benefit as a result. It's just getting the fans to carry over into the women's game. There's clearly a love for the sports there. Obviously, I've not. Obviously, I've not been to an NHL game. I would love to go. I'll be very interested to see the percentage of fans in the arena. Let's just take the home TV audience out of it, because that's when you're in your comfort zone. You can watch as a family in the arena, watching the game live in the flesh. How many would actually be female? Because I'm guessing at around 40% in the UK. When I went to rugby matches, there was, I would say, about 30% of the fans were female. As a rough guess, from what I used to see going to and from the stadium, on the trains, on the transport, I would about 30% would be female. Cricket, when I went to Lords, there was a significant female presence there. About 25-30% of the crowd when I was at Lords were women. So clearly there is a fair proportion of the fan base of sports who are female. Don't get me wrong, women do go to football matches in this country, soccer matches in this country, right? But from my experience going to games, there were a lot less female fans in football stadiums in the UK than any other sports that I've listed. I think you would have to do surveys of sports fan bases to work out would they support a women's equivalent. Would they be interested in watching the women's equivalent? I think that's where you're going to get a better feel of should we really push the women's game. I think this is where some of the pushback's coming from. At the same time, if you want to increase diversity, you have to start at the bottom and work your way up, not from the top down. And they're trying to go from the top down, and it's meeting increasing resistance. Well, sure, I'll be very interested to know the percentage of fans who go to games. That includes season ticket holders, excluding watching at a bar or at home. When you have been to games, how many female fans are there? I'm going by the experiences I've had. Now, they're not going to be mirrored by everyone. They're not going to, not every sports fan is going to have the same experience. But I can definitely see a difference between the amount of hockey games I've been to and the amount of football games I've been to as the two sports that I've watched the most as a fan. And I can definitely tell you more women went to hockey matches as a percentage of the crowd than to football matches, as a percentage of the fans in that particular stadium or that particular arena. That is something that I have seen with my own eyes and experienced myself. It will be interesting to see the numbers. And this is how you work out whether a sport's going to be viable. If you get fan feedback and you look at the numbers of those female fans who also, either as an amateur, semi-professional, or at college or at school, played sport, then you can work out if a league is going to be viable. Then you have to ask the question of the fan base of the existing men's team, how many of them would be willing to support a women's team in the same location, playing the same sport? You have to do your research before you just go, we're having a team, because that doesn't work. Without doing your market research and plan and looking at the community you're willing to represent, you're going to represent, you have no idea. And unfortunately, forcing the agenda without really doing any proper thought ahead, it's not going to work. If you suddenly have a lot of female football players, or those who want to, if let's say you advertise, we're going to start an amateur women's team, and we're having tryouts, and out of that you get 15 responses, you're not going to be able to film a squad. If you've got 150 responses of girls and women willing to lace up some boots, put some shin pads on and a kit, one of them has to go in goal, you can form a team. There is clearly a lack of grassroots discussion. And this is in this country. I don't know what it's like in North America. I don't know what it's like in Australia and New Zealand. I don't know what it's like in South Africa. I don't know what it's like in South America. But from what I'm seeing, there clearly seems to be a lack of outreach at grassroots community level and a lack of research at grassroots community level. Hence why you're getting the resistance when you're trying to force it on the elite level. I don't know. I think I'm trying to be pragmatic and reasonable in the discussion. I think I'm all for the growth of women's sport. I have nothing against that. I think it's the methods they're going about it are wrong and are actually probably hindering the growth of the sport and increasing the resistance to growing the sport. The RFU, the FA, the NHL in North America, the NRL, I think the NRL got it right in Australia. The governing bodies of these sports and these professional leagues, they need to start at the grassroots level. They need to go out into the communities that they want to put teams in. They need to ask the fans of the men's equivalent team, would you be interested in trying out for a women's team, supporting a women's team, being involved in the women's game, what the response would be. Because what I am seeing, regardless of whatever sport we're talking about, being the Women's Basketball Association, which take the hate from social media aside, you look at the numbers, you look at the finance, you look at the attendance levels, it doesn't make a lot of money. They've got big arenas they're playing in, they can't fill. It's a fact that the finances don't make good reading. Simple. That's a simple breaking down. Forget who's playing the sport. You look at it, it's not a great money maker. Simple as. It's not drawing in the revenue. It's not getting enough financial. It's been struggling for 20 years to make money. It's a financial black hole. Simple answer there. Taking the players out of it and the social media negativity out of it, it doesn't make a lot of money. It doesn't. If I was starting up a league, I wouldn't do it. If I was starting up a team, I wouldn't put it in the women's NBA. I would look at a different sport altogether. Field hockey, or lacrosse, or whatever other sport. If I was starting up a team, I wouldn't start a women's basketball team. Or let's just say that the money doesn't work. Field hockey, yeah, GB has got a world-class field hockey program. It does. So do the Australians and the Germans, annoyingly. And but we do have a very good women's and men's field hockey program that delivers results. And the professional game is very well played. They're not paid as much as you think, but it's a solid foundation, and they should be growing that. Yes. Women's golf and women's tennis, I love watching that because it is individual athletes against individual athletes. And women's golf, because they can't drive as far, their approach play is better. There you go. Some of the men's guys on a par 5 are already on the green in 3 shots, or 2 shots with the length they can drive. Women's par 5, there's more approach play. They have to, get a wedge out. They have to get a smaller iron out and do more approach play. And it's actually far more technical and fun to watch. Just putting it out there. Because they can't drive it as far, they have to have better approach play. It's actually more interesting watching a female golfer approach the green than a male golfer. I'm just stating fact. Women's tennis, there's the argument: should they go to 5 sets in the Grand Slams? I have no problem watching women's tennis at all. I actually kind of enjoy it because it's a good quality sport. No one's complaining about women playing tennis. There's no one complaining about women playing golf. Well, there are, but not in the same numbers. They don't get the same hate. As I say, I don't follow basketball. I'm not a massive fan of basketball. I don't hate sports. I just don't enjoy watching it. It's not my cup of tea. Um, but basketball is very, very popular in Europe, in the continent. It is, and it does have a good following and a good financial basis. Um, it's a very well played sport. It's a well supported sport, and it's a well funded sport in comparison. The difference is it's a cultural thing. There was a lot of government funding post 1945 across Europe for these social clubs to come together and help rebuild the country. Women's rights improved massively across the board, across Europe in the aftermath of the Second World War, and there was a lot of government funding that went to, women's education, um, workers' rights, sporting rights, the whole lot. A lot of state funding, which has had a lasting legacy now. And yes, there is it's very interesting. North America, a country not overly affected by World War II in the sense of invasion, bombing, destruction. Women's sport is lagging behind. Put two and two together. A lot more effort was put into rebuilding communities and the sports club dynamic. People from all backgrounds in a community join the local sports club. There's a lot of questions coming in. Them doing this stuff wrong and rushing this with women's sports reminds me of what professional wrestling companies like World Wrestling Entertainment, formerly the World Wrestling Federation, and WCW and all that did with the women's divisions. Yeah, I went off pro wrestling a long time ago. I no longer have any interest in it. I understand the argument there, and yeah, the women's side of Raw and SmackDown, and even on the Impact on TNA, and then you have WCW, what's left of it, the aftermath of that company being bought out and split up, and all the other wrestling promotions. Yeah, they didn't deal with that very, very well. Instead of letting them do their own thing, they kept pushing how their women and coping the old male wrestlers. Yeah, that's an ongoing. That's a debate about pro wrestling and it's the way it promotes itself. There's a reason why I don't watch pro wrestling anymore. There's a very big reason why. It's the culture within that kind of sports entertainment is what pro wrestling is, but there is an undercurrent culture of some very negative stories that come out of pro wrestling about the culture within the locker room and the culture within the organisations. But you can discuss that on a different day. I think the hate for women's basketball is a North American thing. Women's professional basketball is popular in Europe without the hate. There's still going to be criticism of individual players and teams. I think it is a cultural thing. The fact that in Europe post 1945, a lot of effort was put into women's education, women's rights, rebuilding communities. The countries that were most affected by the devastation of the Second World War are the ones that have higher female participation in sport. It's weird, isn't it? But at the same time, it's also the governments had massive state Olympic funded, especially in Eastern Europe, had massive funding programs dedicated towards the Winter and Summer Olympics. Massive funding programs in the former Yugoslavia, the former Soviet bloc, and then certain aspects in Western Europe as well. There was obviously we've got the GB, Team GB, aspect of things. North America, it's more based in the US university system. Different style of funding structure, different style of sport, because it's the way the sports are structured over in the US and Canada is different as well. But it's interesting. It's still an interesting debate to have about the cultural differences in sport. But it is notable that the countries that suffered most out of the Second World War have the highest female participation rates in sport. You look at Europe and post 1945 to now, and professional women's sport and participation in sport, pro, amateur, or semi-pro level, striking. The winter sports is different. I have noticed the women's winter sports programs at the Olympics and World Championships. The crowd numbers are always good because winter sports, in my mind, are extreme sports: skiing, snowboarding, bobsleigh, skeleton bob, luge, all that. Those the crowd numbers are always massive, and there always seems to be a very mixed audience. So when I'm watching ski jumping, the downhill, Super G, whatever the winter sport is, you look at the crowd, it's a good mix. It's a good mixed crowd. Winter sports seem to have that nailed down quite well. Motorsport as well, there's a lot of female fans, and you have a lot of female, motorcycle riders, motocross riders, rally drivers, touring. There's more women involved in motorsport. Not in Formula One. Formula One seems to be lagging far, far behind. But in the other, motorsport categories, there are a lot of women, female participation, team owners, engineers, fans, and participants. So that's something to look at. Yes, the USA does seem very, very polarized. It's becoming more and more polarized. I think over the last, I'm going to say the last 20 years, it's become more apparent on social media, but I think that polarization has been there for a while. And you have to look at the reasons for that polarization. You've got the east and west coasts, and then the bit in the middle called the flyover states, as it's well known, the Bible Belt, the Amish country, the Rocky. The east and west coasts seem to be more Democrat, and the bits in the middle are more Republican. And there's your polarization. Small Midwest America, so your small little city or town in Oklahoma, and then you have your big urban area like LA or New York or Chicago, and then you have the small farming town, small country city, like 10, 20,000 people, just a small, and small town America versus big city America. There's your polarization. That's been like that for 150 years. But in more recent times, the polarization is there. But America has been a very divided country for a very long time, going back to the civil rights movement and beyond. There's nothing new about discussing the polarization of the US, especially when it comes to sport. There seems to be a less, I don't know how to put this, less positivity towards women's versions of the sport, less support for it. Which is like Danica Patrick when she was driving in IndyCar and NASCAR, got a lot of hate. She was significantly better than a lot of the men she was driving against. But she received a hell of a lot of abuse. And it was a shame because she was a pretty talented driver. But at the same time, when she did have a bad race or a bad crash, they just said, they were on it, which is a shame. But what I have noticed when it comes to viewership and supporter base, there's a fair few women who do go to sport. So I think the best way to develop and grow, it's not from the top down, it's from the bottom up. You need to have that grassroots, but via the education system, amateur clubs, so your local get together with your mates, and they need to do research. They need to survey the existing fan bases of the sport they want to put a women's team in, and go, would you support a women's team in this town, this city, this location? And if the responses are mostly negative, that gives the message: we don't. That's not a sexist opinion. That's just working out what the sports fandom want and like. But there we go. That's my opinion on those things. Yes, women's Euros. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. Women's football is not a bad watch. It's not. the thing with women's football is, yes, it has come a long way, but I think they are going about growing the sport in the wrong way. That's my personal opinion. I think they're going about the growth of the sport in the wrong way. I do think England have got a very good chance of winning those Euros, and I think that could be a positive for the women's game. Is England having a good tournament? But yeah, I think the media coverage is going to be in your face, and overdone, and I don't know. It's an opportunity to grow the game. Yes, I always say that any international tournament is an opportunity to grow whatever sport we're discussing. There are ways of doing it. And while I enjoy watching the women's game, and I enjoy watching, you know, while I enjoy watching the women's game, and I happily watch women's football, women's rugby, women's rugby league, and I enjoy watching and women's cricket. I actually kind of enjoy it because it's different, it's refreshing. I treat it as a completely different sport. I I understand that the quality level is less and the skill level is less, but I find it refreshing. What frustrates me is the way the governing bodies and the mainstream media as well are trying to promote and push the growth. It has to come from the bottom up, not the top down. You have to figure out if there is a fan base going to be there and if there's a receptiveness there. Unfortunately, social media doesn't help. And we're coming back to the negativity around social media. And if I was running a women's sports team, I would say get off social media now. I would tell my team to get off social media. Avoid Twitter, avoid Instagram, avoid YouTube, avoid Facebook. I would say avoid it because they're going to put themselves out there in a position that they don't want to be in. Yeah. Look, Phil Neville. He's obviously moving on to David Beckham's Miami franchise as a coach, so he's getting whacked off to the MLS. But as I say, the way to grow the game, that I think the governing, if I was setting up a women's or a men's team, I would be very very clear on their social media use. I would try and keep them off it. Having a team social media account is different, but having I would basically tell the players, yeah, your social media responsibilities basically don't have it. I That would be my opinion, uh, but each their own. Each their own in regards to that. But I'm of the opinion that I think social media is having more negative than positive impacts in the last few years. It's becoming more and more negative as time goes on. But I'm of the opinion that if I was setting up a sports team, if let's say I won the lottery, let's say I won the Euro Millions on Tuesday, right? Let's say I've a fair bit of money. Let's say I came into some money. Well, however I do it, and I was buying a team or setting up a team. I think the discussions I will be having with the coaching staff and the player base is social media conduct. I think, less of that, partly for their own mental well-being, but then you just take out all the toxic crap. You keep them away from the toxic crap. I'm not one of those people who say, "Oh, wrap and cotton wool," but I think if I was, especially a women's team, if I was setting up a women's team, I would basically tell the players, yeah, don't use social media. I'm just going to save you a lot of harassment, abuse, and crap, because it's going to clearly do them no mental favors. Whatever you think of the women's sport, I think the abuse they're receiving is wrong. And going back to the women's NBA and all that, it's a league that doesn't make a lot of money. It should be making a mint. It really should be making a lot more money than it does. It scrapes by. But the abuse they're receiving, and there's individuals going out there just going, "This is crap." It's like, well, there's I don't get that kind of crap they're getting, but the internet. religious right-wing misogynists versus godless America-hating far-left ultra-liberals. You just described Portland. You just described the state of Oregon, which until 1956 in its constitution it banned people of Afro-Caribbean and Japanese, Asian heritage from living in the state of Oregon until 1956. It's in their state constitution. Had to write that in. Had to remove that block. Yeah, Oregon is a very fucked up state because you have Portland, where the two sides of the US clash on a daily basis. Yeah, I think what you mentioned about women's pro wrestling in the last 20 years, 20, 30 years, and women's pro sports and how they tried to go about growing the women's side of the roster and growing an interest. Yeah, they're going about it the wrong way. You've got to see if there's an interest from the wider fan base first, and also target questionnaires. If you got to survey your wider fan base, and then once you've surveyed your wider fan base, then you can target the female fans and say, would you be interested in participating, like tryouts, playing, watching, and you go from there. You have to, in my opinion, and what I've seen is there is a great opportunity to go about it the right way, and I don't know that. In my opinion, I think that the various governing bodies of the various sports are going about it in the wrong way. They're trying to drive an agenda, and they're meeting resistance, and they keep going along with the same course rather than going, okay, we might need a different. We might have to be a bit more open-minded about how we grow this sport, how we grow this um, how we go about it. But yeah, I think there are ways of going about growing. It doesn't matter if it's men and women's sport, or growing a new team, or trying to grow a sport in general. There are ways of going about it, and there needs to be grassroots level upwards. There needs to be you would need to survey your grassroots fan base. That's your match day going fans, plus the fans who just enjoy the sport but watch at home. You would have to reach out and survey people. You'd have to get a feel for what the wider public think. You have to. Going from the top down doesn't work, but that's my opinion on that. I wonder why professional sports works, because that one's quite an easy one. It's PR. You go for the obvious, and then the middle classes can say we're doing something because that makes the middle classes feel warm and fuzzy inside because they're always in competition with their neighbours about who's doing the most goody do gooding crap. I think there are problems there. A lot of these people are trying to find problems which don't exist, and trying to inflate problems that do exist into making them seem worse than they actually are. Although I will say this, discrimination of all kinds has been on the uptake in recent years. It's becoming more prevalent in recent years. But I'm at a loss really in personally about the state of play when it comes to sport and society. But sport is a mirror of the society it's played in, and there are problems. And some of the issues are this forced diversity and the forcing of the women's whatever sport it is on the population. When you really need to start at the grassroots level with education, which involves schools, which involves the amateur side, the grassroots, youth teams, whatever it may be in the community, and asking the community itself, do you want this? Do you need this? And unfortunately, I think the FA, the RFU, the NHL, the NBA, I think they're going to be very surprised and very shocked if they were to do that. That's why they don't do it. They have an agenda they're set upon, and to change course will be seen as failure, rather than actually admit they've got it wrong and not necessarily start again, but work in conjunction with reaching out to the bottom, whilst from the top saying we want this to happen, let's find a positive solution to it. They go right the wrong way. Sheffield United, I think that this season they just haven't got going. I think they had a very good season last season. I don't think they overachieved last season. I think that actually was a fair reflection of where they were playing wise and with the squad they assembled. But this season it's just not worked, has it? They've won 2 games, one being an FA Cup game, one being a league game. It just hasn't worked. I don't know. I think you would have to discuss. You would have to ask Sheffield United fans. I think the fan base know it's the game's up. They might catch West Brom, but I think the confidence is gone. The whole thing is, I just don't know what's happened with Sheffield United. Really, I've never seen a team this bad. Even Derby County weren't this bad. They had, I just, they're at risk of having the lowest points total in the Premier League ever, beating Derby County's worst season, which was 11 points. They are at risk of getting less points than Derby County. That is something that I would never thought I would say ever again. And it's not as if they're a promoted side. They were a Premier League side last season. So something's gone wrong there. And they're just going through the motions, which we'll see what happens, is my personal opinion on that one. There are some other teams around them who are also equally bad. West Brom and Fulham spring to mind as teams that are also equally shocking, in all honesty. But I don't know what to say really. 5 points at this stage of the season. I know we start the season a month later than in past years, so in that case, yeah. But I've never seen a team this bad at this stage of the season, and I don't know how they turn it around. I really don't. I don't know how it gets turned around. I really don't know how the club, the players, how it gets turned around. They could catch West Brom, but that's wishful thinking. I don't know where Resistal Sealays play a team playing Bath, which is a city without a professional football team near to Bristol. I don't necessarily think that's what the women's teams need to do necessarily. Why not then call them Bath women rather than Bristol City? Why have they decided to choose to play in Bath? That's a question you have to ask the ownership of the club. Why are they playing, in a different location? You're not going to build a fan base doing that. You might as well call them Bath. You might as well call that Bath Women Football Club. I don't get why the Bristol ladies are not playing in Bristol. That to me is a ridiculous move by the ownership. That's going to do nothing to grow that a fan base. But Bath is an interesting location because the Bristol clubs have had a relationship with Bath on the men's game in the past. But I just can't see that making any sense. On the mentality and what other players will be mentally at the end of the season, I don't know how many of these players will kick on in their careers. But there's still a long way to go in the season. A lot can happen. A lot can change. So we'll have to see where we are in a month or 2 months' time. They may get a couple of wins, and then suddenly it's a different ball game with Sheffield United. But at the moment, they are just getting battered pillar to post. If Sam Allardyce is been offered 10 million to keep West Brom in the Premier League, that's a third of their transfer budget for this season going into this season. That's ridiculous. I can't see West Brom staying up. I just can't. They're playing just as bad as Sheffield United, so I can't see that being a thing. I don't know. Right, I've been going for 3 hours, so I'm going to call that a stream. Thanks, obviously, for all your questions and watching and everything. Really appreciate it. I'm going to call it a day. I might post some videos later. I might do some videos later, but we'll see. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it all. Keep your eyes peeled for some more content coming up soon. And goodbye for now.